Chapter 286. The boat slowly sailed towards the shore. Marquis Garcia's eyes were deep as he could already see the figure of the cavalry on the shore. Although Marquis Garcia's complexion was still as calm as before, Colin could still see the other party's clenched fists. In order to ease the current awkward atmosphere, Colin took the initiative to talk about the changes that had happened in the northern frontier in the past 6 months. Marquis Garcia listened silently without any reaction. It wasn't until Colin had finished speaking that he commented faintly. "You did a good job." Colin couldn't help but stick out his chest, as if he was a student who had been praised by his teacher. But then, Marquis Garcia's next sentence made him fall from the clouds. "Her Majesty is pregnant with your child, right?" Colin immediately stiffened. He felt as if he had been caught red-handed by his father-in-law. For a moment, he didn't know whether to tell a lie or to admit it honestly. Fortunately, Queen Aisha whispered, "Your Excellency Marquis, I am pregnant with the child of the Miller family." Marquis Garcia understood the meaning of the Queen's words. This child would not become Colin's heir, and she would never threaten Vera's position. Therefore, Marquis Garcia once again looked at the other side of the shore and no longer spoke. Colin heaved a sigh of relief. However, he also reacted. In the culture of this world, the existence of aristocratic lovers was very tolerant. Most of the aristocrats had lovers and illegitimate children. Of course, the premise was that she would not threaten the position of the main wife. Otherwise, Marquis Garcia would not let Queen Aisha go so easily. Colin turned his head and quietly gave Queen Aisha a thumbs up. Queen Aisha responded with a charming smile. Seeing that Marquis Garcia did not have any desire to talk, and his whole body was exuding an isolated and indifferent aura, Colin did not dare to disturb him too much. He went to Queen Aisha's side and whispered, "Have you already decided on the candidate for the city lord of Alfalfa City?" "Yes." Queen Aisha nodded. She understood that Colin remembered what the Earl of Avon had said before he left. She then explained, "He shouldn't be a descendant of the House of St. Thean." "Oh. Why are you so sure?" Queen Aisha nodded and said a name that Colin was familiar with, Ron Lute. Someone from the Lute family? Colin remembered that the half-elf queen consort before Aisha was from the Lute family, and the Duke of Lute was the commander of the Silvermoon Guard. However, under the instigation of Sith Savoy, this person started a coup d'état. Of course, it was mercilessly extinguished in the end. As a result, the Lute family was stripped of their title and land by Queen Aisha, and they were banished from Silvermoon City. "Yes." Queen Aisha explained, "This Ron is the nephew of the Duke of Lute. He is a third-rank knight and has some talent. He has gathered a group of people from the Lute family around him. Therefore, I gave him this opportunity. I promised that as long as he could secure the position of the city lord of Alfalfa City, I would confer this place to the Lute family and give them a corresponding title." Colin nodded and agreed with Queen Aisha's decision. First of all, since this Ron had a name and a surname, and his background could be investigated, then he couldn't be a descendant of the House of St. Thean. Moreover, as a former top family of the half-elves, Ron's ability, connections, and prestige were all guaranteed. It was better than having a fugitive as the city lord. "Tell him to pay attention to whether there are any suspicious people." "I know." After Colin gave a simple explanation, he didn't say anything else. At present, he didn't have the time to play hide and seek with the descendant of the House of St. Thean in Alfalfa City. He didn't even have the time to care about the ownership of this city. His top priority was to return to the northern frontier as soon as possible and take Vera to Imperial Dragon City to meet Emperor Reinhardt. He wanted to completely finalize the succession of the Dukes of the North. After that, he would be able to free up his hands and solve these messy problems. However, he really didn't pay attention to the descendant of the House of St. Thean. After all, even Mr. Luo was dead. What could the House of St. Thean do? Moreover, Colin also suspected that the descendant of the House of St. Thean didn't exist at all. Could it be that the Earl of Avon deliberately scattered a smoke bomb? While his thoughts were running wild, the boat slowly approached the shore. Before Marquis Garcia got off the boat, he saw the black cavalry kneeling on the shore. Knight Roger yelled at the top of his voice. The Black Cavalry welcomes the return of Lord Marquis. The Black Cavalry welcomes the return of Lord Marquis. The voices of the nearly 10,000 Black Cavalry soldiers resounded through the New River, and a somber atmosphere began to slowly gather. Colin silently looked at the scene in front of him with deep eyes. He had no doubt that as long as Marquis Garcia gave the order, the Black Cavalry would immediately cross the river to avenge him. They didn't even care if the northern frontier could support another war at this time, and they didn't care if the 10,000 Black Cavalry soldiers could sweep the eastern region. Where one person pointed, the whole army would follow. This was the prestige of Marquis Garcia in the Black Cavalry. Even if Colin had already led this army to several great victories, even if Knight Roger had already led the Black Cavalry soldiers to swear allegiance to Colin under the command of Marquis Garcia, he still couldn't erase the imprint that Marquis Garcia had firmly engraved in the souls of this army. At this time, Colin couldn't help but worry that the Black Cavalry would leave him. Marquis Garcia's deep eyes slowly swept across the Black Cavalry soldiers on the shore. Everywhere he looked, every Black Cavalry soldier couldn't help but straighten their chests, accepting the inspection of the person they believed in. Perhaps it was because they saw Marquis Garcia's white hair and the walking stick in his hand, but the breathing of the Black Cavalry soldiers gradually became heavier, and their eyes seemed to have flames dancing. The northern wind whimpered, and under the reflection of the setting sun, the river of wrath looked like blood surging. But just as this momentum rose to its peak, Marquis Garcia suddenly opened his mouth. "I don't have the qualifications to be your commander." Knight Roger was just about to speak, but he was forced to retreat by Marquis Garcia's cold gaze. "I trusted the wrong person, which led to the crushing defeat in Shadow Canyon. I was unwilling to accept the fact that I couldn't abide by the promise to live and die with the Black Cavalry. I was also unable to see through the enemy's conspiracy, which led to the northern frontier falling into chaos and suffering. I don't ask for your forgiveness, but I also don't have the face to lead you." Marquis Garcia raised his finger and pointed at Colin, saying in a clear voice, "You need a new commander." Colin's heart was in turmoil. He turned his head and saw Marquis Garcia's deep gaze. In this gaze, there was guilt, relief, and ardent expectation. Colin understood that Marquis Garcia was officially handing over the Black Cavalry to him. Although this was the scene he yearned for day and night, when it came to it, Colin was still moved. At the same time, he was also shocked by this heavy responsibility. Marquis Garcia smiled slightly, and his tone was full of encouragement. "From now on, the Black Cavalry will become history. Viscount Angley, give this army that belongs to you a new name." Colin's mind turned quickly, knowing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If he missed this opportunity, he didn't know when he would be able to truly subdue the strongest army in the northern frontier. "Let's call it the Blood Cavalry," Colin said in a clear voice, "originated from the Black Cavalry, reborn in blood, and will grow in the blood of the enemy." Marquis Garcia whispered the name of the Blood Cavalry several times, with a satisfied smile on his face. Then, he slowly stepped back a few steps, highlighting Colin's position. Colin also took the responsibility and said in a clear voice, "Blood Cavalry, listen to my order." Bang! Knight Roger's left hand heavily hit the armor on his chest, and his eyes moved from Marquis Garcia to Colin. Then, a series of knocks resounded through the sky, converging into a unified voice. The former Black Cavalry soldiers finally really accepted the change of their identity. Colin's heart was surging, and he ordered, "Escort Marquis Garcia back to the northern frontier." "Yes, Blood Cavalry." Colin stood on the bow of the ship with his head held high, accepting the cheers of the Blood Cavalry soldiers, and his heart was surging with incomparable heroism. Behind him, Marquis Garcia stared at Colin's tall and straight heroic figure. In a trance, he seemed to see himself 20 years ago. The two men, one in front and one behind, one in high spirits, the other in bleak. It seemed to mark the end of an old era and the beginning of a new era. Chapter 287. The dense clouds obscured the silver moon, leaving only a dim halo in the sky. The weak moonlight couldn't even outline the shadows. In the dark Imperial Dragon City, there were only sporadic embellishments. The only exception was the northernmost part of Imperial Dragon City. There, a strange golden light fell from the sky, propping up the dark curtain of night. It was the direction of the Holy Mountain, and also the Holy Land of the Church of Glory, the Cathedral of Holy Light. This inextinguishable pillar of holy light was like an eternal lighthouse, illuminating the lost people in the deep darkness with hope and direction. It was like this tonight, and every night. In the crisp sound of horse hooves, a four-wheeled carriage pulled by three tall horses slowly moved towards the Cathedral of Holy Light. The guards on night duty didn't stop the carriage. Instead, they stood with their heads held high and lined up to welcome the distinguished guests. Those who were qualified to ride a four-wheeled carriage to the peak of the Holy Mountain must be important people of noble status. In the middle of the carriage's side wall, there was a purifying scarlet flame pattern. Obviously, the visitor must be a core member of the imperial family. The carriage slowly stopped in front of the steps of the Cathedral of Holy Light. A knight with a sword jumped down from the open-air seat at the back of the carriage, ignoring the church guards who came forward to inquire. He held a crystal lamp in one hand and placed a golden step in the other at the door of the carriage. Then the door opened, and a tall and slender woman stepped out of the carriage. She wore a slightly simple prayer dress, but her beautiful face made the church guards' hearts tremble. They didn't dare to look at her, and quickly bowed their heads and saluted. "Your Highness." Empress Medela nodded gently in greeting, then walked up the steps towards the church. The unique rhythm of her walk accentuated her peerless beauty, and under the illumination of the holy light that descended from the sky, there was a hint of holiness. The prayer hall of the church was extremely large. Dozens of limestone pillars supported the 24-meter-high dome, giving people a feeling of insignificance. In addition, there were 4 huge statues of sword-wielding angels, which made people feel even more awe-inspiring. The dome of the prayer hall was made of a special crystal. The inextinguishable holy light passed through the dome, plating everything in the hall with a layer of gold, showing a sense of holiness and solemnity. Empress Medela stood in front of the statue of the God of Light, her hands clasped together in prayer. A faint chanting sound echoed in the prayer hall. It sounded like someone was singing a hymn, but it also sounded like an echo from heaven. Tranquility, serenity, and a soothing power filled the air. After an unknown period of time, Empress Medela finished her prayer. She raised her head and looked at the holy light that seemed to lead to heaven. A hint of mockery appeared on her face. "Are you really listening?" Medela asked in a voice as soft as a mosquito's. The holy light was still as dazzling as before, as if it had not changed at all because of the Empress' disrespectful questioning. The mockery on Queen Medela's face deepened. "Perhaps it's as he said, you're already dead." There was still no response. Empress Medela shook her head, seemingly losing her patience. She slowly turned around and saw a bald old priest standing behind her. She didn't know how long he had been standing there, or if he had heard what the Empress had said. The purple priest's robe he wore indicated his noble identity, the Pope. The priest's robe of the Church of Light could be white, gray, or black. These colors could be worn by archbishops to ordinary priests, but there were 2 special colors that they could not wear, red and purple. The red priest's robe was worn by the 3 cardinals. They were the 3 people with the highest status in the church other than the Pope. Because of the color of the priest's robe, they were also called cardinals. As for the purple priest's robe, only the Pope himself could wear it. "Good evening, Your Holiness Gregory." Empress Medela did not panic at all, as if she did not care if the Pope had heard her muttering just now. "Good evening, Your Highness. Pope Gregory had a kind face, and his smile had a natural affinity, as if all the sufferings in the world could be dispelled by his smile. Is His Majesty's illness better? Empress Medela sighed, a hint of worry appearing on her exquisite face. She shook her head and said, not yet. He woke up for a while this morning, but soon fell into a deep sleep again. The smile on Pope Gregory's face also disappeared, and he seemed to be very surprised. Even Tournan was unable to improve His Majesty's condition. Empress Medela looked sorrowful. Cardinal Tournan is still unable to find the cause of His Majesty's illness, so I'm afraid it's a little tricky. Pope Gregory sighed and comforted her. Then I'll personally go to Phoenix Palace tomorrow. The God of Light will not give up on his devout shepherd. Please rest assured. Empress Medela hurriedly bowed and thanked him, then took her leave. Watching the graceful figure of the Empress disappear at the entrance of the prayer hall, the Pope looked up at the holy light descending from the sky with a complicated expression in his eyes. Not long after, an attendant quickly came to Pope Gregory's side and reported softly. Your Holiness, Archbishop Ajani is back. Pope Gregory raised his eyebrows and thought for a moment. Let her wait for me in the confessional at the lowest level of the side hall. Yes. Then, Pope Gregory came to the statue of the God of Light and stood still. He put his palms together and lowered his head in prayer, perhaps praying for the emperor who had suddenly become seriously ill. After the prayer, Pope Gregory left the prayer hall, passed through the long corridor, and followed the spiral staircase to the lowest level of the cathedral. Facing him was a smooth stone wall with a huge oak door installed on the wall. Pope Gregory pushed the door open and entered. The furnishings in the room were simple, with only a table and 2 chairs. On the table was a scripture of light and a row of silver candlesticks. In the soft candlelight, Ajani, dressed in a white robe, immediately stood up and bowed to the Pope. Gregory still had a compassionate smile on his face, but the words that came out of his mouth were not polite at all. You disappoint me. Ajani's heart trembled as she defended herself. Your Holiness, there have been too many unforeseen events on the northern frontier. I can't, am I looking for an excuse? Gregory interrupted. Ajani immediately shut her mouth, as if realizing something. She asked softly in a slightly trembling voice, Are you going to punish me? Anyone who has done wrong should be punished. Hearing this, Ajani's breathing suddenly quickened, her watery peach blossom eyes instantly filled with fear. But under Gregory's forceful gaze, she silently turned around and knelt on the ground, her arms crossed and her eyes closed, waiting for the impending punishment. At some point, a long whip had appeared in Gregory's hand. The whip was covered with spikes, and one could even smell the thick stench of blood. Crack. The long whip lashed against Ajani's back, leaving a bloody whip mark on her back. A suppressed cry of pain came from Ajani's mouth. Her body was like a fragile flower in a storm, trembling. A satisfied smile appeared on Gregory's face, but he did not stop swinging the whip. Crack. The long whips fell like a storm, tearing the sorcerer robe behind Ajani to shreds. Bloody whip marks appeared one after another, forming a shocking contrast with her snow-white and flawless skin. It actually had a sad and cruel beauty to it. Ajani couldn't help but let out a series of painful moans. And this sound of ecstasy only made the perpetrator even more excited. The smile on Gregory's face became more and more brilliant, his eyes flashing with a perverted light, as if he had obtained great satisfaction from torturing a beautiful girl. This satisfaction of dominating and suppressing a beauty was very similar to sexual pleasure, and even more so. Generally, the priests of the Church of Radiance did not abstain from sexual desires. Marrying and having children did not hinder them from serving the God of Radiance. But if this priest had lofty ambitions, vainly thinking that he could one day reach the peak of the holy mountain, wear the crown of thorns and become the Pope, then he had to maintain a pure body. The reason was very simple. Legend had it that the Church of Radiance had a divine weapon that could communicate with heaven, the golden horn, which had been wielded by successive popes. But to blow the golden horn, this person had to dedicate himself wholeheartedly to the God of Radiance, and could not be tainted by the affairs of men and women. Therefore, there were many ascetics in the church who abstained from sexual desires, and this Gregory who could ascend to the position of pope was of course even more so. Between beauty and power, Gregory naturally knew which to choose. But as long as one was human, there would always be desires and desires that needed to be dispelled. But he did not expect Gregory's method of dispelling to be so perverted and cruel. After a long time, Gregory finally finished venting. At this time, Ajani was already lying on the ground weakly, gasping for breath with difficulty. Her entire back was covered with ferocious crisscrossing whip scars, dripping with blood. It was a tragic sight. Gregory threw away the long whip, and took out an exquisite little bottle, dripping the holy water from the bottle onto Ajani's back. Ajani's body could not help but tremble and twitch. It was obvious that the process was not pleasant. God has mercy on the world, the Lord heals all living beings. Gregory cast a healing spell on Ajani, and a compassionate smile once again appeared on his face. In an instant, he had returned to being the sanctimonious pope. It had to be said that the healing spell cast by the pope himself was indeed powerful. Combined with the holy water, the scars on Ajani's back healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon disappeared. Ajani finally got up, and slowly sat up from the ground. Her mage robe had long been damaged by the whip, and now it had completely slipped off, revealing her infinitely beautiful upper body. Ajani did not even try to hide it, and it was unknown whether it was because she did not dare to, or because she was deliberately provoking the man in front of her. Gregory looked away as if he had been electrocuted, as if he was afraid that if he looked at her a few more times, he would not be able to control himself, and the results of most of his life's hard work would be destroyed. Ajani seemed to have seen this scene, and she lowered her head, but the corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she was disdainful, but also as if she was happy that she had succeeded in her revenge. Gregory coughed a few times and ordered, "Vera St. Hilda will arrive at Imperial Dragon City soon. At this time, the northern frontier has no leader, so you should immediately rush back to Winter City and see if you can take the opportunity to win over more lords." "Yes," Ajani replied obediently. Gregory took one last greedy look at Ajani's exquisite curves, and then he turned around, pushed the door open, and walked out. The confessional was quiet again. Ajani was stunned for a long time, and then she picked up the bloody long whip from the ground, and looked at it carefully, as if she wanted to see some mystery in it. A moment later, she pressed the long whip against her chest, and let the blood on it wet her snow-white skin again. She slowly tightened her hand, and the barbs on the long whip immediately pierced her chest, and blood oozed out again. Ajani groaned softly, and it was a little painful. But then, her tightly knitted brows slowly relaxed, and a look of enjoyment appeared on her face. Ajani looked up, and her deep eyes seemed to penetrate the layers of obstacles, and rose to the sky along the holy light. The omnipotent God of light, the lost lamb needs guidance, please listen to her confession. Chapter 288. Do you think there are still dragons in this world? Colin suddenly asked with a smile as he looked at the tall and majestic walls of Imperial Dragon City. Vera was riding on the same horse as him. At this time, she was curled up in her husband's warm embrace. She replied in a lazy tone, "Dragons are extinct. Of course there are no dragons left." Colin seemed to be a little unwilling to give up. He said stubbornly, "Maybe there are some surviving dragons hiding in some dark corner." Vera pursed her lips and smiled. She explained, "There is such a possibility, but it is not very likely. According to the records, the High Elves created a wonderful spell called the Dragon Search Spell. It can locate the approximate location of the dragons in the world. Therefore, if there are still dragons in the world, the High Elves will definitely know." However, the conclusion that the dragons are extinct was made by the High Elves. I think they said that because they are confident. Colin nodded. Only then did he understand. But then he sighed with some regret. That's really a pity. I still want to see the glory of a giant dragon. Scholar Dwayne interrupted, the dragons should be extinct, but there is still a dragon egg in the Phoenix Palace. If Lord Viscounts is interested, you can go and take a look. Oh. Dragon egg? It did not hatch. Colin was interested. Of course not. Scholar Dwayne shook his head. The San Lorenzo family has also tried all kinds of methods, but the dragon egg did not show any signs of life. Vera saw Colin's yearning face and smiled. Colin, if you are interested in dragons, you can go to Yevil. The Mage Council still has a few dragon skeletons. However, most of the dragon skeletons are in the hands of the elves. If the Radiant Moon Forest is not a forbidden area, you can feast your eyes on it. It is a forbidden area now, but it might not be in the future. Colin said excitedly. Yes, in fact, the mages have also been trying to find a way to enter the Radiant Moon Forest. Imperial Dragon City was in front of them while the three of them were discussing enthusiastically. The welcoming team was already lined up neatly outside the city gate. The beautiful figure in the lead was Empress Medela. Aunt. Vera quickly jumped down from her horse and walked a few steps forward before she hugged Empress Medela affectionately. Medela gently stroked Vera's back as she tried to comfort her. I have also heard about what happened to your father. I am really sorry. Vera nodded her head gently and did not say anything else. Her feelings for the Duke of St. Hilda were very complicated, and she did not know how to express it. Your Highness. Colin hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. Queen Medela smiled and said, Colin, it is a pity that I was not able to attend your wedding. However, I am also very pleased that Vera has such an outstanding knight to protect her. It's my honor to receive your recognition. From now on, I'll work even harder and definitely won't let you down. Colin maintained his politeness on the surface, but in his heart, he kept a respectful distance from this beautiful empress. The other party's actions in Silvermoon City had already let Colin know that this woman was not someone to be trifled with. This time, his plan in coming to Imperial Dragon City was to let Vera receive the title as soon as possible and then immediately return to officially take over the northern frontier. Only by redeveloping the northern frontier would Colin be able to gain a firm foothold in this world. Under the lead of Empress Medela, Colin and the others entered Imperial Dragon City. As the Radiant Empire and the largest city in this world, Imperial Dragon City was indeed much more prosperous than Winter City. The spacious streets were full of pedestrians coming and going, but after seeing the royal flag, they all moved to the side of the road and curiously observed who was entering the city. In order to avoid unnecessary disturbances, Colin and Vera both got into the Empress carriage so that outsiders could not see them. However, there were still some smart people who recognized the team of the House of St. Hilda from the Golden Lion badge, and they knew that it should be the successor of the Dukes of the North who had come to receive the title of the Emperor. All the way to the Phoenix Palace, Colin jumped out of the carriage first and then helped Vera and Empress Medela out of the carriage in a very gentlemanly manner. The palace maids who were waiting for them took out colorful petals from their baskets and sprinkled them in the air, and soon the road leading to the Phoenix Palace was covered with petals. Vera held on to Colin's arm, stepped on the stairs covered with flowers, and walked towards the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Originally, Colin thought that Emperor Reinhardt would welcome them in the palace, but unexpectedly, he did not see the Emperor of the Radiant Empire. This made him wonder if the Emperor was really too busy, or did he have a problem with Vera. According to Scholar Dwayne's judgment, Emperor Reinhardt should want to see Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North, but now it seemed that something was wrong. Colin's heart was filled with a trace of haze, and he did not even pay much attention to the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Empress Medela led Colin and Vera into the reception hall of the side palace. The decoration style of the hall was not particularly luxurious, but if one looked carefully, they would find that there was a subtle elegance hidden in the subtle details. Exquisite and unique murals and sculptures decorated the corners of the hall, and the floor was covered with hundreds of years old paulownia wood. There were 7 crystal magic lamps hanging from the ceiling, and even though it was daytime, they still emitted a soft light. The 3 of them sat down, and several beautiful palace maids came in with silver plates to serve drinks and desserts. Out of courtesy, Vera looked at the murals on the wall. At this time, Colin wisely kept his mouth shut. As the son of the Baron in the countryside, his artistic skills were limited, and he did not want to make a fool of himself. Fortunately, Empress Medela was also a member of the House of St. Hilda, and the atmosphere quickly became casual and cordial. However, Colin was a little absent-minded. He was wondering when Emperor Reinhardt was going to appear. However, from the beginning to the end, they did not see the ruler of the empire. Instead, they saw the son and daughter of the Empress. Colin had already met Prince Harrison in Silvermoon City. Perhaps Colin had left a deep impression on the prince, but when he saw Colin again, he was a little afraid. When he greeted Colin, he was obviously avoiding eye contact. As for Princess Judy, this was the first time that Colin had seen her. She was slightly younger than Prince Harrison and wore a cute floral pleated dress. Her hair was tied up in 2 ponytails, and she wore a pair of silver crystal shoes. She looked very much like Empress Medela. She was a beauty, but there was still some baby fat on her face, which made her even more lovable. Moreover, she seemed to know how to play to her advantage. As soon as they met, she called Sister Vera and Brother Colin very sweetly. Vera's heart was quickly captured, and she held Judy in her arms and did not want to let go. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became warmer, and the topic of conversation became the children's story. Vera and Colin's trip to the imperial capital seemed to have become a visit to their relatives. However, until the end of the meeting, Empress Medela did not mention anything about the Duke's conferment, nor did she say when Emperor Reinhardt would meet Vera. Since the other party did not mention it, Colin did not dare to ask. When Empress Medela got up and sent Vera and Colin to rest, only Prince Harrison and Princess Judy were left in the living room. Judy was still eating the remaining dessert with relish, while Harrison was staring blankly at the ground. No one knew what he was thinking. "Brother, aren't you going to eat?" Judy asked kindly. Harrison shook his head absent-mindedly. "That Viscount Angley is nothing to be afraid of." "When did I say that I was afraid of him?" Harrison was like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on, and he suddenly became angry. Judy's charmingly naive appearance was gone, and she revealed her true colors as she smiled and said, "Do you want me to avenge you?" Harrison seemed to be a little moved, but he still said stubbornly, I don't have a grudge against him." "Is that so? Then who was the one who had nightmares at night and called out his name, and even wet the bed?" "Coo coo coo coo." Seeing his sister laughing at him, Harrison was so angry that his face turned red. He jumped up from the chair and walked out without looking back. "Hey, Brother Harrison, wait for me." Chapter 289. While Vera and Colin were being escorted to the Phoenix Palace by Queen Medela, Scholar Dwayne came to the southern district of Imperial Dragon City alone. Since the Sacred Mountain and Phoenix Palace were both located in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City, nobles with some status would think of ways to settle down in the northern district. As for the southern district, it naturally became a gathering place for the commoners. The further south one went, the more dilapidated the buildings became. However, in such a residential area, there was a manor that did not fit in with the surrounding environment. Although the location of the manor was not good, it occupied a large area. There were many fruit trees that had sprouted out of the ground, and there were several unique villas within the walls. There were also stables, barracks, warehouses, and gardens. It was definitely a noble manor. In the entire Imperial Dragon City, the only person who was willing to build such a manor in the residential area was the Prime Minister, Baron Heidegger. The Prime Minister of the Empire, who was born as a commoner, had always kept a respectful distance from the nobles. This was something that could not be changed even though he had been in a high position for more than 40 years. Perhaps it was precisely because he was born at the bottom that he was able to understand the thoughts of the people at the bottom, that he was able to govern the empire to such an extent. Of course, this might also be the reason why the Senate of the Empire had always looked down on this country bumpkin. After confirming his identity, Scholar Dwayne was led into the manor by the butler. However, the butler did not lead Scholar Dwayne to the study room or the living room. Instead, he led him to a lawn behind the main castle. There, Scholar Dwayne saw the Prime Minister of the Empire, who was squatting on the ground and roasting sweet potatoes. Baron Heidegger was already in his 70s. His hair was white, but he was still hale and hearty. He was wearing a slightly old but tidy casual outfit, and he looked like an ordinary old man. He did not have the aura of someone who was in charge of the Empire's government at all. Prime Minister. Scholar Dwayne quickened his pace as he stepped forward and bowed. Baron Heidegger was obviously very familiar with Scholar Dwayne. When he saw Scholar Dwayne, he pointed at the ground and said casually, "Have a seat and have a taste of my roasted sweet potatoes." Okay. Scholar Dwayne did not feel that he had been neglected. He sat down on the lawn and took the sweet potato from the Baron with a smile. Perhaps it was a little hot, so he quickly blew on it and tossed it in his hand. Due to years of hard work, Baron Heidegger's eyes had lost the vigor they should have. They were dull and dull, but everyone who was stared at by this pair of dull eyes would feel uncomfortable. It was as if he had the ability to see through everything, making everyone unable to hide the filth in their hearts. Scholar Dwayne, on the other hand, maintained his leisurely demeanor under such gazes. He carefully peeled the sweet potato in his hand and ate it with relish. Seeing how the other party was enjoying himself, a smile appeared on Baron Heidegger's face, and he asked, "Is there any problem with the food supply in the northern frontier this year? Viscount Angley has received great support from the half-elven kingdom, so he should be able to survive this year. It's just that the commoners will have a hard time." At this point, Scholar Dwayne raised his head and looked at Baron Heidegger with hopeful eyes. He asked, "If the central government of the Empire can provide some food, then the situation in the northern frontier will be much better." Baron Heidegger shook his head and refused, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but I'm afraid that there will be some problems with the food supply in the Flame territory this year." "What's wrong?" Scholar Dwayne was rather puzzled. "There haven't been any disasters in the Flame territory in recent years, right?" Baron Heidegger's face became a little solemn. "The situation in the western region is a little bad. The St. Gerian family has sent letters to the central government of the Empire several times, asking for support. However, His Majesty and the Senate have not agreed to send troops. They only agreed to provide food and material support." Scholar Dwayne also frowned. He asked, "Is the orcs putting so much pressure on us?" "Yes. According to the letter from the St. Gerian family, an orc force called the Battlecry tribe is rising at an extremely terrifying speed. The western region has no choice but to send an expeditionary force over the Broken Sky mountain range to carry out military intervention to prevent the Battlecry tribe from taking advantage of the situation and even unifying the orcs to establish the Third Orc Empire." The Third Orc Empire? Scholar Dwayne was horrified. The Radiant Empire established by the humans occupied the most fertile area in the central part of the continent, but it was inevitable that there would be other races coveting it. Other than the dwarves, goblins, and half-elves, who were weak and could only rely on the Radiant Empire, there were only 4 races that could really threaten the humans: the trolls in the north, the elves in the east, the nagas in the south, and the orcs in the west. The elves had long disappeared from the Radiant Moon Forest, so the eastern region of the empire was actually the most stable. The nagas were an amphibious race. Being away from water for a long time would cause their skin to become dehydrated and dry. Therefore, their harm to the southern region was limited to their daily plundering. At most, they would occupy some coastal areas and were not much of a threat. The trolls in the north were once a great threat, but under the strong suppression of the northern frontier, they could no longer cause any trouble. Now, they only dared to hide far away in the northern part of the sky ice field, struggling at death's door. Only the orcs in the west had always been a big threat to the Radiant Empire. If the other three races did not have an absolute advantage in military force compared to the humans, then the orcs were different. An ordinary orc soldier basically required 3 or 4 human soldiers to deal with. In terms of professionals, the orcs believed in the god of destruction, and their divine profession was Skull Crusher. Their strength was far beyond that of human knights of the same level, and they were completely invincible. Fortunately, although the orcs were superior in military force, they were lacking in intelligence. Therefore, the development of the orc civilization could be said to be at the bottom of the 5 races. Until now, they were still in a loose tribal form, fighting with each other, and it was difficult to form a joint force. But there were exceptions to everything. In the history of the orcs, there were also many talented heroes. Under their efforts, the orcs had 2 short periods of unification. That was the so-called First Orc Empire and Second Orc Empire. Once the orcs were unified, the orc army they formed would definitely be the most terrifying existence on this continent. After the establishment of the Second Orc Empire last time, the orc army marched straight into the western region. It only took them 3 months to break through the western region, annihilate the main army of the Flaming Flame territory, and besiege the Imperial Dragon City. If it were not for the fact that the Imperial Dragon City could not be taken down for a long time, and the internal contradictions of the Second Orc Empire gradually became apparent, causing the human race to seize the opportunity and plot to make the Second Orc Empire fall apart, the ruler of this continent would have changed. But after that, the Radiant Empire had always been on guard against the orcs, fearing that the orcs would unite again and even establish a third orc empire. Therefore, this time, when the Battlecry tribe rose strongly and showed signs of unifying the orcs, the western region immediately sent an expeditionary force to cross the Sky-Broken Mountain range in an attempt to intervene with military force and nip the danger in the bud. Scholar Dwayne also knew the severity of the matter and did not mention the matter of borrowing food. Instead, he asked, "How is the situation of the expeditionary force sent by the western region?" The Sangarian family sent the expeditionary force last October, and there is no clear good news yet. Therefore, it is difficult for me to judge the situation in the west of the Sky-Broken Mountain range. Then, the two of them fell silent at the same time, obviously worried. After a while, Scholar Dwayne spoke again. "Since the Sangarian family has repeatedly asked the Empire for support, why has His Majesty not agreed?" Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said, "It has been more than 1,000 years since the fall of the Second Orc Empire. The Western region has submitted hundreds of requests for help to the Empire's Central. Every time, some tribe is rising strongly and showing signs of unifying the orcs. At first, the Empire's Central attached great importance to it and sent troops almost every time. But later, we gradually found out that the Sangarian family was just exaggerating and wanted the Empire's Central to help them clean up the trouble at the border. Later, unless the threat of the orcs was confirmed, the Empire's Central would not easily send troops to the western region." Scholar Dwayne was also somewhat helpless. It turned out that the Empire's Central was also afraid of the western region. Baron Heidegger glanced at Scholar Dwayne and said, "Moreover, at that time, the northern frontier was in chaos. His Majesty might have wanted to intervene. But later, due to some reasons, it was also left unsettled." Scholar Dwayne's eyes flashed. He thought to himself, is the Menham family sending troops to the northern frontier not considered intervention? Now that the northern frontier has been pacified, but there is no good news from the western region's expeditionary force. His Majesty should be prepared to send troops to support the Sangarian family, right? No. Baron Heidegger shook his head, and his eyes became even more worried. Why? Scholar Dwayne was puzzled. He would rather believe in the orcs' unification than not. He did not understand why His Majesty was so careless. Baron Heidegger narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, Because someone wants to start another war. Chapter 290. Another war. Scholar Duane exclaimed in shock. Baron Heidegger nodded expressionlessly and explained, Prince Rhy wants to declare war on the Mage Congress and send troops to attack Yule. Scholar Duane was silent. He could also understand Prince Rhy's motive. The appearance of the forbidden spell, Trial's Eye, made all the knights of the Empire unable to eat or sleep in peace, especially the paladin Prince Lacy. He had already killed Mr. Hale, but now, it seemed that he wanted to completely destroy the Mage Congress. Yule will not allow himself to be captured without a fight. Has Prince Lacy not thought of the consequences of doing so? Is he not worried that the mages will risk their lives to destroy him? Baron Heidegger sighed and said, You have not interacted much with Prince Rhy, so you do not understand him. He is not someone who can be threatened. Back then, Emperor Reinhardt secretly made an agreement with Mr. Hale, thinking that he could use the power of the mages to suppress Prince Rhy. Haha, unfortunately, he did not understand. No, perhaps he did, but he did not want to believe it. If someone held a sword to Prince Rhy's neck, his first reaction would not be to compromise, but to pull out his sword and stab. Even if his neck was pierced through because of this. This is the pride of a holy knight. Scholar Duane was speechless. Indeed, if Prince Lacy had been coerced by such means, he wouldn't have been able to overcome all the obstacles and enter the sanctuary realm. Therefore, after knowing that Mr. Hale used a forbidden spell to kill the Duke of St. Hilda, Prince Rhy immediately went to the northern frontier and decisively killed Mr. Hale. He was not worried about whether this action would attract the revenge of the mages. He even wanted to completely destroy the Mage Congress. Perhaps he was already prepared to become the next target of this forbidden spell, Trial's Eye. The mages claimed that they wanted to destroy him, but the holy knights would rather die than submit. Scholar Duane's heart was heavy. He asked again, Has Prince Rhy's proposal been discussed in the Imperial Conference? What is the result? What is the opinion of the Senate? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, The Imperial Conference has not been held yet, so the attitude of the parties is not clear. When will the Imperial Conference be held? Could it be that this proposal has just been proposed? No, half a month ago, after Prince Lacy returned from the northern frontier, he proposed this declaration of war, but it was never brought to the Imperial Conference for discussion. Why? Because. Baron Heidegger frowned. Because His Majesty never attends the Imperial Conference. It's impossible for me to preside over such an important topic. Scholar Dawn frowned as well. He had heard that Emperor Reinhardt was not in charge of military affairs. He left military affairs to Prince Lech, government affairs to Baron Heidegger, and foreign affairs to Empress Medela. In short, he was either obsessed with pursuing the path of a knight, or busy with cuckolding the nobles in the imperial capital. However, Scholar Duane did not expect that Emperor Reinhardt would not attend the Imperial Conference even though the war against the mages was about to be declared. This was too absurd. Scholar Duane immediately realized that perhaps Emperor Reinhardt was deliberately not attending the Imperial Conference. He was definitely not willing to declare war on the mages, and was even counting on the mages to keep Prince Lacy in check. Therefore, in the face of Prince Lacy's tyrannical behavior, Emperor Reinhardt chose to hide. Are we going to drag this out forever? Scholar Duane felt that Emperor Reinhardt's choice was not wise. Baron Heidegger's lips curled into a mocking smile. How can Prince Lacy let this proposal drag on forever? There is another way to mobilize the central army of the Empire other than His Majesty's order. The Senate. Scholar Duane immediately reacted. But then, his frown deepened. The Senate was set up to restrict the power of the king. If there was an extremely absurd emperor, there had to be an organization that could keep him in check. According to the glorious charter, as long as the Senate could pass a resolution with an absolute majority, the resolution could take effect directly without the consent of the emperor. Therefore, as long as Prince Lacy could obtain more than 2/3 of the support in the Senate, he could directly bypass Emperor Reinhardt and start a war against Yule. However, Scholar Dwayne also realized that if Prince Lacy really did this, he would completely fall out with Emperor Reinhardt. Will the Senate support Prince Lacy in this matter? Scholar Dwayne's tone was somewhat heavy. Baron Heidegger shrugged and put on a helpless expression. You're asking the wrong person. I can't find out the true attitude of the elders in the Senate. Scholar Dwayne then realized that he had asked a silly question in his confusion. However, when he thought about the conflict between Baron Heidegger and the Senate, Scholar Dwayne remembered the real purpose of his visit. Prime Minister, I actually came to see you this time because I hope that you can stand up for young Master Joyce at the right time to inherit the Dukes of the North. Baron Heidegger was stunned. He was about to say that he had no right to speak on the issue of the succession of the Dukes of the North, but then he immediately understood Scholar Dwayne's true purpose. You want to use me to influence the Senate's decision, right? That's a smart approach. Okay, I'll find a suitable opportunity to help. At this point, Baron Heidegger suddenly stopped as if he had thought of something important. Prime Minister. Scholar Dwayne called out in confusion. Your train of thought has given me a lot of inspiration. Baron Heidegger came back to his senses and his face was full of excitement. At first, I thought that if Prince Lacy wanted to declare war on the mages through the Senate, I wouldn't be able to do anything. After all, you know that the Senate and I are like fire and water. But now, you've given me a new way of thinking. Perhaps, I can really use this method to influence the Senate's decision. Scholar Dwayne's eyes flashed. He understood what Baron Heidegger meant, so he asked carefully, So, do you support Prince Lacy's declaration of war on the mages, or do you oppose it? Oppose. Baron Heidegger said without hesitation. Now is not the best time to deal with Yule. Scholar Dwayne nodded in agreement. He also didn't think that it was the right time to provoke Yule. The northern frontier had just been stabilized, and it seemed that something was going to happen in the western region. It was not a wise move for the Empire to provoke the Mage Congress at this time. Moreover, Vera was also a mage. Scholar Dwayne was also worried that this trend would affect the succession of the Dukes of the North. Suddenly, Scholar Dwayne thought of another question. Oh, by the way, if Emperor Reinhardt is unwilling to attend the Imperial Conference, then I'm afraid that he will not meet Miss Vera, right? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, I don't think so. I heard some rumors saying that His Majesty has fallen ill and that he has even invited the Pope to treat him. I just don't know if this is true or just an excuse to delay the matter. Scholar Dwayne's heart was heavy. He began to feel that he and Vera would have to wait for a long time in Imperial Dragon City. At the very least, they would have to wait until the game between Prince Lacy and Emperor Reinhardt came to an end. This was an extremely dangerous political whirlpool. If they were not careful and got involved, Scholar Dwayne had a headache. Baron Heidegger seemed to have seen through Scholar Dwayne's worries and he asked, What's wrong? Are you worried that the northern frontier will be in chaos if you stay in Imperial Dragon City for too long? The northern frontier should not be in chaos. Marquis Garcia is in Winter City. That's good. Baron Heidegger looked into Scholar Dwayne's eyes and said seriously, However, I would like to remind you that it would be best not to arrange for Vera to meet His Majesty before the outcome of this battle is out. Why? Baron Heidegger did not answer the question directly. Instead, he asked slowly, what kind of person is the easiest to get out of the whirlpool? Scholar Dwayne thought for a moment before he said, a person who has no burdens. Baron Heidegger smiled in relief and did not say anything else. He just meticulously peeled the sweet potato. The expression on his face was so serious that it seemed as though he was carefully carving a piece of art. Do you know? The yield of sweet potatoes is much higher than that of wheat. I have always wanted to promote sweet potatoes as a staple food to replace wheat, but I have not been able to get enough recognition. Scholar Dwayne smiled and said, that's because everyone can't bear to live without bread. Baron Heidegger snorted and said leisurely. Perhaps it won't be long before they are not qualified to be so picky about their food anymore. Scholar Duane nodded thoughtfully. When he saw Baron Heidegger eating the sweet potato, he could not help but ask, Prime Minister, Queen Medela will be hosting a banquet at the Phoenix Palace tonight to entertain Miss Vera and Viscount Angley. Aren't you going to attend? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, No, I'm not going. The food at aristocratic banquets makes me sick. I still prefer a coarse food like sweet potatoes. Scholar Duane smiled faintly and did not try to persuade him anymore. He then picked up another sweet potato from the grill and blew on it while peeling it. When Baron Heidegger saw this, he asked, What's wrong? Aren't you going as well? Scholar Duane took a bite of the sweet potato and said with a smile, I'm not going. I also think that your family's banquet is more attractive. Baron Heidegger laughed heartily and said with a proud expression, That's right. You are the second person in the entire Radiant Empire who has such good taste. Oh. Scholar Duane asked curiously. Then I'm very curious. Who is the other person? Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said a name, Tournens. Scholar Duane was shocked. He knew that this was the name of a cardinal of the Radiant Church. Moreover, this cardinal was the one who was ranked first among the 3 cardinals. Chapter 291. Colin, do you think it is appropriate for me to wear this to the palace banquet later? After changing her clothes, Vera gracefully walked to her husband's side and asked in a delicate voice. Colin's eyes lit up immediately. Vera chose a black-toned strapless dress with black silk stockings and silver stilettos, which set off her snow-white skin, making her look mysterious, noble, sexy and elegant. You will definitely be the center of attention at the banquet, my dear. Vera was overjoyed when she heard her lover's compliment. She blushed as she placed her hand on Colin's shoulder and gently pushed him onto the sofa before she gave him a long and affectionate kiss. After a while, Vera lay on Colin's chest and enjoyed her lover's caress. Colin drew circles on Vera's back as he asked, When do you think His Majesty will meet you? Vera squinted her eyes comfortably like a lazy kitten and said in a daze, I should be able to see His Majesty at the banquet tonight. Colin chuckled and shook his head before he said, I think that His Majesty will still not show up at the banquet tonight. Why? Vera opened her eyes, her gaze still a little blurred. My intuition. Colin replied in a slightly dignified tone. I am afraid that this trip to Imperial Dragon City will not go as smoothly as I expected. Alright, don't think too much about it. Let me help you change your clothes, okay? Vera tried to persuade him. Beautiful lady, it's my pleasure. Colin stopped thinking about it and got up from the sofa with Vera in his arms. Then you have to listen to my instructions and don't rush me. I just don't want to be late. If you behave yourself, we will not be late. It took the both of them more than 2 hours to get ready. At this time, Vera's face was red and she was panting. It seemed that helping Colin choose his clothes was indeed a big project. Then, the two of them boarded the carriage that was already waiting outside the palace and headed towards the Palace of Phoenix. Crystal candlesticks and chandeliers had already been lit up in the magnificent banquet hall. Hundreds of nobles from the imperial capital had gathered together, and it was extremely lively. Just as Colin had expected, Emperor Reinhardt didn't show up. The banquet was hosted by Empress Medela. Perhaps it was because Vera was still not one of the dukes of the north, so the standard of this welcome banquet was not considered top-notch. The only person who really attended the banquet was Empress Medela. The Emperor, Prince Lexi, the Prime Minister of the Empire, and the 5 senators of the Senate were not present. Colin knew that one of the 5 senators in the Senate was from the House of St. Hilda. In terms of seniority, he was Vera's granduncle. However, he did not expect that even he would not be present at the welcome banquet. Hee, how interesting. After a round of toasts, the grand welcoming banquet officially began. Colin no longer cared about the current situation in the imperial capital. At this time, he focused on eating the delicious food on the table. He was not familiar with these people who stood at the top of the empire. Scholar Dwayne had gone to visit the Prime Minister of the Empire. Colin was going to wait for him to come back and discuss the current situation with him. The lemon-steamed sea bass tasted very good, the pan-fried giant rhinoceros ribs were very chewy, the creamy lettuce was fresh and delicious, and the champagne was very intoxicating. Except for the deer blood wine, Colin was very satisfied with the banquet. It seemed that the palace chef was really good. When the candles in the crystal candlesticks were about to burn out, Empress Medela announced the end of the banquet. The guests returned to their respective lounges and asked the palace servants to clean up the tableware, change the candles, lay the carpet, and decorate the ball. After everything was ready, the guests returned to the hall. A melodious melody sounded and the ball officially began. Colin held Vera in his arms for the first dance, and then he planned to invite Empress Medela. He wanted to express his gratitude to her for preparing this welcome banquet, and also wanted to take this opportunity to test the attitude of the emperor. However, what Colin didn't expect was that someone would actually interfere. "Viscount Angley, may I invite you for the next dance?" Princess Judy stood in front of Colin. She was wearing a snow-white dress with flower petals and a princess laurel crown on her head. Her milky white face was flushed red. "Of course, it would be my pleasure." Colin responded politely. Refusing a lady's invitation to dance was not something a gentleman should do, let alone a young lady. Colin held Judy's little hand and stepped onto the red carpet dance floor. The melodious harp played a lively movement. Princess Judy was about 11 years old and was about 1.4 meters tall. She looked slender and elegant, but Colin still had to bend his knees to cooperate with her to put on a court dance stance. "Viscount Angley, Brother Harrison told me that you are very good at telling stories." Princess Judy whispered in Colin's ear. Colin guided the little girl to spin slowly on the dance floor. Hearing this, he smiled faintly and said, "Prince Harrison, you flatter me." At the same time, he was a little puzzled. Because from Prince Harrison's reaction when he saw Colin earlier, Colin should have left a big psychological scar on him. Why would he praise him for being good at telling stories? While he was thinking, Colin suddenly felt a weight on his foot, and then he heard Princess Judy's apology. "Ah, sorry, Viscount Angley, I accidentally stepped on you." "It's okay." Colin smiled and did not mind. "Can you tell me a story when you have time?" Princess Judy said coquettishly. Actually, my stories are not suitable for children to listen to." Just as Colin was trying to evade, he felt another weight on his foot. "Ah, sorry, Viscount Angley, I stepped on you again." Colin lowered his head and saw an apologetic and innocent face. However, Colin did not think that she did it unintentionally. "Your Highness, your court dance still needs more practice." "Yes. Why don't you teach me?" "Your Highness, you think too highly of me. I don't have the qualifications to be your dance teacher." "Viscount Angley, you are too polite. I feel that you dance better than my current dance teacher." While speaking, Princess Judy almost accidentally stepped on Colin a few times, but Colin dodged without leaving a trace. With Colin's reflexes and speed as a fifth-step knight, it was easy for him to dodge a little girl's step. However, Princess Judy was very persistent. Under her skirt, her crystal shoes kept poking out, as if she would not give up until she stepped on him. Her expression was sometimes annoyed, sometimes angry, sometimes gnashing her teeth. She completely threw away her cute and obedient disguise, revealing her mischievous nature. Colin smiled and did not say anything, elegantly dodging Princess Judy's step. At the same time, he did not forget to tease her, "Your Highness, your rhythm is messed up." "Humph." Princess Judy ignored Colin and continued to focus on her task of stepping on his feet. This time, the dance became stuttering and there was no elegance to it. The surrounding audience also saw the clues and smiled. Obviously, they had some understanding of Princess Judy's temper. Seeing that she could not step on Colin, Princess Judy was so anxious that she was about to cry. Her pitiful appearance made people feel sorry for her. However, Colin would not be fooled. He guessed that this little girl was most likely acting. As if seeing that Colin was not fooled, Princess Judy rolled her eyes and suddenly said, "Viscount Angley, do you know why father did not attend the banquet?" Colin's eyes narrowed and asked curiously, "Why?" However, Princess Judy smiled proudly and did not answer. Colin understood and could only sigh. He no longer dodged and allowed Princess Judy to ruthlessly step on his foot. The little girl suddenly smiled, as if she had won a great victory. She used all her strength to step on Colin's feet and said softly, "Because father is sick." Sick. Colin's heart skipped a beat. He was about to continue asking when the music stopped. Princess Judy raised her small head, gathered her skirt, curtsied to Colin and then walked away. Seeing that she was running in the direction of Prince Harrison, she was probably going to show off to her brother. Colin shook his head with a smile. Then, he saw Empress Medela walk over. She was wearing a palatial purple low-cut corset dress, revealing her round shoulders and large snow-white breasts. The exquisite tailoring outlined the perfect curves of her body. Her long golden hair was tied up in a noblewoman's bun, and her slender waist swayed as she walked. She was graceful, dignified, and charming, and made Colin fall into a daze for a moment. "Sorry, Viscount Angley, Judy is a little naughty." Colin smiled and said, "Not at all, Her Highness is very cute." The music started again. Empress Medela smiled and reached out her left hand. Colin hurriedly went forward and hugged the Empress' slender waist, swaying to the music. Chapter 292. Colin held Empress Medela's slender waist as they danced on the ornate carpet, accompanied by a melodious melody. In the framework of the court dance, the man and woman dancing together looked like they were hugging each other, but in reality, that was just an illusion. Apart from their arms, there was no other body contact between the two. Only lovers or husband and wife would have their abdomens pressed together intimately. Colin naturally wouldn't be rude to Empress Medela, but he didn't expect the Empress to take the initiative. Feeling the softness and warmth on his lower abdomen, Colin's mind remained calm. Judy has been learning to dance since she was young, but she has a bad habit of stepping on people's feet. "It's not aimed at you, I hope you don't take it to heart," Empress Medela whispered into his ear. Her languid tone and moist breath constantly stirred Colin's heart. "It's an honor to be stepped on by a beautiful lady," Colin replied with a smile. At the same time, he remembered that Empress Medela had also stepped on him at the ball in Silvery Moon. It seems that like mother, like daughter. Perhaps she thought of the same thing, but Empress Medela's beautiful face flushed red. Colin led Empress Medela around in a quick circle, her purple dress blooming like a flower, the seductive scenery flashing past. "I heard His Majesty is sick." Colin suddenly spoke, waking Empress Medela, who was intoxicated by the melodious dance music. The Empress rolled her eyes and glanced at Colin. She smiled and said, "Where did you hear the news?" Colin didn't speak. He wasn't going to expose a little girl. But seeing Empress Medela's reaction, this news should be true. No wonder Emperor Reinhardt hadn't appeared. Seeing that Colin wasn't willing to reveal the source of the news, Empress Medela didn't pursue the matter. She nodded and said, "Yes, His Majesty is indeed sick, but you don't need to worry. He should be fine soon. Also, I hope you don't spread this news. After all, it's easy to cause unnecessary panic." "I understand." Colin nodded and then asked, "Your Majesty, what do you think about the successor of the Dukes of the North?" Empress Medela's expression turned solemn as she spoke softly. "Don't worry. Both His Majesty and I want to see Vera inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Moreover, you also have the will of the previous Dukes of the North in your hands. So, you can relax and wait for a while. When the time is right, I will naturally arrange for you to meet His Majesty." Not only did Queen Medella's comforting words not ease Colin's mind, but they also made him realize that something was wrong with the current situation in the capital. Moreover, Colin also noticed that the Empress had said, "Wait for the right time," instead of, "Wait for His Majesty to recover from his illness." This made him wonder if it was not because His Majesty was seriously ill that he could not meet any guests at this time. Instead, it was because the timing was not right for him to meet Vera. "Your Highness, of course I am willing to listen to your arrangements." Although his heart was full of doubts, Colin certainly did not question the Empress's decision on the surface. After all, they were not in Winter City now. They were in Imperial Dragon City. The House of St. Hilda did not have much power here. Vera's aunt, Queen Medella, was definitely one of the most important people. Of course, Colin did not completely trust the beautiful Empress. She was indeed Vera's aunt, but she was also Joyce's aunt. Colin had no way of knowing which side her heart was leaning towards. Seeing that Colin was so obedient, the smile on Queen Medella's face became brighter and brighter. "By the way, there is one more thing that you need to pay attention to. Please tell us. Don't trust Seabass St. Hilda." Huh? Colin's heart skipped a beat and he almost missed the beat. Fortunately, he quickly adjusted himself. Seabass St. Hilda was Vera's uncle. He was also one of the senators of the Empire. There were a total of 5 senators in the Empire's Senate, and each of them was an elder from one of the 5 major paladin families. The 5 senators would take turns as the chairman of the Senate every month. They were responsible for presiding over the Senate's meetings that month. Therefore, Seabass was also an important person in the House of St. Hilda in Imperial Dragon City. Originally, Colin and Vera had planned to visit Seabass the next day. However, they did not expect Queen Medella to remind them not to trust him. What was going on? In terms of seniority, Seabass was Medella's uncle. Was there a family feud going on? Colin was speechless for a while. He quickly asked, "Your Highness, why is that so?" But Empress Medella remained silent. When Colin saw this, he did not continue to ask. At the end of the song, Colin let go of Queen Medella's hand and slender waist and bowed to her. Empress Medella smiled and curtsied back, saying softly, "Trust me, the current Imperial Dragon City is a dangerous whirlpool. The best choice for you and Vera is to stay out of it. If you rashly get involved, it will only be difficult to get out." Colin narrowed his eyes and said, "Your Highness." Queen Medella interrupted him and said, "Don't ask too much. Don't think too much. Wait patiently for my news." After saying this sentence, Queen Medella swayed her waist and left. Colin was left standing there in a daze. "Colin, what's wrong with you?" Vera asked as she walked over and held her husband's arm. "I will tell you more when we get back," Colin patted Vera's hand and said. However, he saw a familiar figure walking towards him. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon, Viscount Angley." The Earl of Avon walked over to Colin with a smile. He then greeted Vera and introduced his female companion to Colin and his wife. "This is Miss Shalia, Prince Lexi's first daughter, and also my fiancée." Colin raised his eyebrows and turned to look at the Earl of Avon's female companion. Miss Shalia was wearing a beige dress. She had delicate facial features, black hair, black eyes, and a gentle temperament. She was the kind of woman who could arouse the sympathy of men. However, what really caught Colin's attention was her identity. She was the daughter of a paladin. Moreover, Colin remembered that the Marquis of the Eastern region that he had just released was the elder brother of the Earl of Avon. He was married to the daughter of one of the Eastern region's earls. It seemed that the Duke of St. Prospero really wanted to change his heir. Colin suddenly thought of the words that he had said to Marquis Vincent at the New Shui River. He suddenly felt that the eastern region would definitely be very lively in the future. Just as Colin was thinking about it, the Earl of Avon suddenly sent an invitation to Vera. "Beautiful Miss Vera, I wonder if I would have the honor to dance with you." Vera turned to look at Colin and saw him nodding with a smile. She then handed her hand to the Earl of Avon. Seeing the two of them walking hand in hand to the dance floor, Shelia blinked her big eyes as if to say to Colin, "What are you waiting for?" Colin also realized what he should do and quickly invited Shelia to dance with him. After getting the other party's consent, Colin held the delicate hand of the paladin's daughter and once again walked to the center of the dance floor. "Did you and the Earl of Avon just get engaged?" Colin asked curiously as he hugged Shelia's waist. "Yes, just a week ago," Shelia whispered, and then no longer said anything. Instead, she concentrated on the dance. Generally speaking, the man of the court dance was the guide and the woman of the court dance was the follower. However, Colin found that Shelia seemed to have a strange magical power that could influence Colin's dance steps. She even guided the elegance of the court dance to the extreme. It was very pleasing to the eye. Even though Colin was not proficient in court dance, he seemed to have become a dance master at this moment. Colin could not help but be intoxicated by this feeling. For a moment, he even forgot to continue to inquire about the Earl of Avon's purpose in coming to Imperial Dragon City at this time. Even after the song ended, Colin still felt a little unsatisfied. Thunderous applause immediately sounded, and Colin finally regained his senses. "You're the best dancer I've ever seen." Colin complimented sincerely. "Thank you." Shelia's face was flushed red, and it seemed that she had not recovered from the dance just now. "Wow! Viscount Angley. I am a little jealous of you. Even when Shelia and I danced together, we did not have such a tacit understanding." The Earl of Avon exclaimed exaggeratedly as he brought Vera back to the side of the dance floor. Vera was also excitedly praising Colin, and at the same time, she did not forget to ask Shelia about the secret of dancing. Colin casually said a few words of modesty before he asked the Earl of Avon, "Have you and Miss Shelia set a date for your wedding?" "It will be held at the end of this year. I will send out invitations at that time. I hope that you and Miss Vera will be able to attend." "Okay. If there are no special circumstances, we will definitely go to the White Dew City to attend the wedding," Colin replied with a smile. After that, Colin and Vera did not enter the dance floor again. Instead, they chatted casually with the Earl of Avon and his wife on the side of the dance floor. It was not until late into the night that the guests left one after another. Chapter 293. The next morning, when Colin brought Vera to the dining hall, they finally met Scholar Dwayne again. "Good morning, Miss Vera, Viscount Angley." "Good morning, Scholar Dwayne. Did the Prime Minister invite you to have dinner at his house yesterday?" "Yes, the Prime Minister was very enthusiastic. I did not want to refuse." It's okay. I understand. Moreover, I believe that the Prime Minister's banquet will not be any worse than the one at the Phoenix Palace. Indeed, they are not inferior." Scholar Dwayne smiled before he told Colin that he had squatted on the lawn with the Prime Minister and ate sweet potatoes last night. Colin and Vera exchanged glances with each other. They had never expected that the Prime Minister of the Empire would treat his guests in such a manner. Of course, when they thought about it carefully, they realized that although the Prime Minister's way of treating the Prime Minister was somewhat rude, it also showed that the Prime Minister treated Scholar Dwayne as one of his own. The maids served a sumptuous breakfast. Colin did not think too much about the Prime Minister's strange way of treating his guests. He cut a piece of juicy fried steak and put it into his mouth. After chewing it, he asked again. "So, how was your talk with the Prime Minister yesterday?" Scholar Dwayne did not answer immediately. Instead, he said to the maid, "You can leave first." "Yes." When only Colin, Vera, and Vera were left in the dining hall, Scholar Dwayne said, overall, the talk was not bad. However, there is good news and bad news. Then, let's talk about the good news first, Colin said with a smile as he took a sip of milk. A good day needs a good start. Scholar Dwayne put down his knife and fork before he wiped his mouth with a napkin, indicating that he had finished eating. He then told Colin the good news that he wanted to hear the most. The Prime Minister is willing to stand up at the right time and publicly announce that he supports young Master Joyce to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin nodded his head. He was very satisfied with the result. Vera was still a little confused and she asked in confusion, the Prime Minister supports Joyce. How is this good news? Scholar Dwayne smiled and told him about the conflict between Baron Heidegger and the Senate. At this moment, Vera finally understood that the reason why the Prime Minister had asked the Prime Minister to support Joyce was actually to provoke the Senate so that they would unanimously agree that Joyce would inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin continued to ask, what's the bad news? Scholar Dwayne's expression became serious. A warsong tribe has appeared among the orcs. The Western region has already sent an expeditionary force to cross the Broken Sky mountain range in an attempt to nip the warsong tribe in the bud. But there has been no good news yet. The Prime Minister is worried that there will be problems in the Western region, but at present, the high-level officials in the capital generally have no plans to send troops to support them. Colin's expression changed as well. He had dug out information about the orcs from his predecessor's memories, so of course he understood the seriousness of this problem. If the Western region was not exaggerating, then this was definitely the biggest threat that the Radiance Empire was about to face. Hearing this, Vera could not help but ask, why are the important people in the capital not willing to send troops to support the Western region? Colin's mouth twitched and he smiled with some disdain. Before the disaster really comes, most people will have a fluke mentality and think that things will not be so bad. Scholar Dwayne nodded and agreed. Indeed. Before seeing the real threat, the central government of the Radiance Empire is not willing to send troops easily. However, in addition to this, there is actually another reason. Oh. What is it? This is another piece of bad news. Scholar Dwayne said in a deep voice. Prince Lacey has asked to declare war on Yevil. What? Vera exclaimed. She had lived and studied in Yevil for more than 10 years and had long regarded it as her second hometown. At this time, when she heard the news, she could not help but worry. Why is this happening? Is it because of the Trials I forbidden spell? But isn't the Radiance Empire worried that the mages will die together? Scholar Dwayne sighed and said, it is indeed because of the Trials I. Prince Lacey is not a person who can withstand coercion. He would rather take the risk of being retaliated by the mages in order to completely eliminate this terrible threat to the knights. When Colin saw Vera's slightly frightened face, he quickly held her slightly cold hand and comforted her. I don't think everyone has the determination and courage of Prince Lacey, right? This proposal to declare war on the mages may not be implemented. Scholar Dwayne nodded. Yes. The current political undercurrents in the capital are surging because of this proposal. Moreover, His Majesty is obviously unwilling to declare war on the mages. He has deliberately closed his door because he does not want this proposal to be passed through the Imperial Conference. Colin smiled and said, I heard that His Majesty fell ill at the banquet yesterday. So it is because of this. It is most likely because of this reason. However, even if His Majesty keeps hiding and does not show up, there is still another way to implement this proposal. Colin was surprised and said, the Senate? Yes. Will Prince Lacey do this? Colin asked in a serious voice. This means that he will completely fall out with Emperor Reinhardt. When Emperor Reinhardt secretly met Mr. Lacey and reached a tacit understanding with him, he had already completely offended Prince Lacey. Therefore, I am afraid that Prince Lacey will no longer care about the dignity of the royal family. Colin's face gradually became gloomy. he also realized why this was bad news for Vera. If Prince Lacy wanted to force his proposal to be passed through the Senate without the consent of the Emperor, he would have to obtain an absolute majority of votes. This also meant that he would have to persuade more than 2/3 of the senators and provoke their hatred towards the mages. And Vera was also a mage. Scholar Duane's original plan was to influence the Senate's decision on the succession of the Dukes of the North through the Prime Minister. However, now it seemed that Prince Lacy's actions were very likely to make this plan fail. Perhaps Prince Lacy did not care about who would inherit the Dukes of the North, but he had inadvertently blocked Vera's path. Moreover, if the Empire really declared war on Yevil, the group of mages would most likely take revenge. Regardless of whether the victims were the citizens of the Empire or the knights and nobles, the Empire of Light's hatred towards the mages would definitely reach a peak. At this time, would Vera, who was a mage, be able to successfully inherit the Dukes of the North? As he thought of this, Colin immediately said in a deep voice, "We cannot let Prince Lacy's proposal pass through the Senate." Scholar Duane also nodded and agreed. That's right. However, Colin immediately felt a headache coming on. Their original plan was to get the support of the Senate through the Prime Minister's statement, but now they realized that trickery didn't work. They still had to deal with the senators one by one. This required a very strong political capital and influence. And this was exactly what Vera and Colin lacked the most right now. "What do you think?" Colin asked. He could only place his hopes on Scholar Duane now. Scholar Duane pondered for a moment and slowly said, "There are 117 members in the Senate of the Empire. They are all well-known figures from the branches of the major families in the Empire. In terms of numbers, roughly 1/5 of them are from the families in the East, South, West, and North, as well as the Flaming Flame territory. Therefore, the power of the entire Senate is basically the same as the power of the vassals in the Empire. There are also 5 senators in the Senate who come from the 5 major paladin families. They have a great influence on the senators of their respective vassal families. If we want Prince Lacy's proposal to fail, we will have to win the support of at least 2 senators and use them to influence the senators of their factions. This way, the proposal to declare war on the mages will not be able to get an absolute majority of votes. In my opinion, the 2 senators who are most likely to be won over by us are the senator of the House of St. Hilda, Seabass, and the senator of the San Lorenzo family, Leadham." Colin frowned. He knew that Scholar Duane's words were very reasonable, but he also knew that it would not be easy to persuade the 2 senators. Seabass was born in the House of St. Hilda. According to seniority, he was Vera's granduncle. Of course, he could represent the interests of the House of St. Hilda. However, the interests of the House of St. Hilda might not necessarily be the same as the interests of Vera. After all, she was not the Dukes of the North yet. Moreover, during the ball last night, Queen Medela had specially reminded him not to trust Senator Seabass. Although Colin did not completely trust Queen Medela, such a reminder still left a trace of haze in his heart. As for Senator Leadham of the San Lorenzo family, he was afraid that he would be more easily persuaded by Prince Lacy. Unless Emperor Reinhardt personally intervened, it would be impossible to change the stance of the senators of the San Lorenzo family. However, this unreliable emperor. Colin could not feel at ease. "Then let's pay a visit to Senator Seabass this afternoon," Vera said. Colin hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he did not voice his doubts. First of all, it was impossible for him to believe everything that Queen Medela said. He would rather test it out himself. Moreover, Vera was a junior who had come to Imperial Dragon City, so it was reasonable for her to pay a visit to Senator Seabass. Otherwise, it would be too rude. "Okay, I will arrange for someone to send the letter first." Chapter 294. Governor Seabass' mansion was located in the northern district of Imperial Dragon City. It covered an area of more than 300 acres, and it was considered one of the top luxurious mansions in the capital. The mansion was built along the street and had a total of 3 floors and a height of 15 meters. The main body of the mansion was made of solid granite and the outer wall was made of precious white glazed rock. From afar, it looked like a jade castle. However, such a magnificent building was only the facade of the governor's mansion. There was a beautiful courtyard and rows upon rows of buildings behind the mansion. That was the main building area, and only distinguished guests were qualified to enter the mansion. When Colin helped Vera out of the carriage, there were already more than a dozen servants waiting for them at the entrance. "Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, welcome home." An old butler who was well dressed bowed and greeted them. The rest of the servants also followed suit and bowed to Vera. Colin looked at the old butler's face and felt that he looked a little familiar. He felt as if he had seen him somewhere before. Although the old butler's attitude was very good, the smile on his face was a little professional and lacked sincerity. "Long time no see, Butler Demick." Vera smiled and nodded at the old butler. Colin also put away the doubts in his heart and nodded to greet the old butler. "Please come in. Master Seabass is waiting for you in the living room." Butler Demick then led Vera and Colin into the living room. When the butler turned around, Vera whispered into Colin's ear, "Demick is Drinden's brother." Colin suddenly understood. Drinden used to be the butler of the house of St. Hilda, and Colin had cut off his head with his own hands. He finally understood why Butler Demick looked a little familiar. It was no wonder that the butler's smile was a little perfunctory. Hee. Colin suddenly felt that his visit this time would not go smoothly. As soon as they entered the mansion, they were greeted by a large green field. Colin didn't know what kind of grass was planted here, but it was soft and comfortable to step on, as if it was a natural carpet. Moreover, it emitted a fresh smell that made people feel relaxed and happy. Just as Colin and the others approached the main castle, the crisp sound of horse hooves suddenly sounded from behind. Following that, a slightly frivolous voice was heard. "Cousin Vera. Welcome to Imperial Dragon City." Colin turned around and saw a dozen people approaching them on horseback. The leader was about 20 years old. He had a thin face, long and narrow eyes, and a frivolous smile on his lips. He was the one who had spoken just now. "Cousin Wilbur, long time no see." Vera turned around and greeted him with a smile on her face. He then whispered to Colin that this knight was the eldest grandson of Consul Seabass. Wilbur arrived in front of Vera, but he did not dismount from his horse. Instead, he bowed slightly to her before he glanced at Colin and said, "This must be my brother-in-law, Viscount Angley, right?" Wilbur's attitude made Colin unhappy. As a collateral descendant of the house of St. Hilda, how could he not dismount from his horse and bow to the eldest daughter of the house of St. Hilda? Needless to say, Vera was about to inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Wilbur's attitude was too disrespectful. "Hello, Knight Wilbur." Colin smiled faintly and nodded to the other party casually. He was a noble of the Empire. Even if Wilbur's grandfather was a consul of the Senate, he was not qualified to make him bow to him. "Viscount Angley, I have heard of your great name in Imperial Dragon City." Wilbur looked down at Colin and said sarcastically, "Silvermoon City annihilated the main force of the Pegasus Legion, killed the Troll Emperor in the Sky Ice Field, defeated the Dwarf Alliance outside Winter City. It's really admirable." Colin said modestly, "You flatter me. These are the achievements of the brave soldiers of the northern frontier. They can't be attributed to me alone. You are too modest. Even my grandfather praised you as the guardian of the northern frontier. He also asked me to learn more from you." Wilbur changed the topic and said, "But I really want to know if you are qualified to be my teacher." Colin wanted to say that he was not interested in being his teacher at all. Just as he was about to casually dismiss this guy who was extremely hostile to him, he saw Wilbur dismount and invite him. "Come, Viscount Angley, let me see your true strength." "Wilbur, don't mess around." Vera's face sank, and her impression of her cousin was instantly reduced to zero. Wilbur's face flashed with anger. Vera reprimanded him in such a tone of an elder, which made him very uncomfortable. However, he did not dare to target Vera. Therefore, he could only continue to provoke Colin. "Viscount Angeli, you're not scared, are you? How about this? Let's not use any weapons. Let's compete with our fists and feet." "Okay." Colin's heart was full of anger. He was determined to teach this arrogant kid a lesson. As for whether this would offend Governor Seabass, he did not care anymore. Moreover, he was more and more convinced that Vera would not be able to win over Governor Seabass. Wilbur immediately smiled when he saw that Colin had accepted the challenge. He stretched his body and got into a fighting posture. He looked as if he was afraid that Colin would go back on his word. Wilbur had become a fourth-order knight before the age of 30. Even in the Imperial Dragon City, where there were many experts, he was still considered a genius. Wilbur had never been defeated by anyone of the same generation as him. This was also the reason why he was so confident in challenging Colin. "Viscount Angeli, be careful." In an instant, Knight Wilbur let out a loud roar. Holy light surged from his body, and he stomped the ground with the tip of his foot. A terrifying power surged through his body like an explosion, surging towards his right fist like a tidal wave. All of his strength, all of his faith, and all of his fanaticism seemed to have been gathered in this one punch. Under the unspeakable malice of jealousy, indignation, hostility, and so on, Webb's punch had actually obtained a sudden sublimation. He even felt that this was a punch that he had performed exceptionally. With this punch, Webb seemed to have already seen Colin screaming and falling to the ground. The guardian of the northern frontier. The gravedigger of the great demon emperor. The rising star of the northern frontier. You still have to cry and beg for mercy under my hands. Ha ha ha, I'm the most outstanding knight of the northern frontier's younger generation. Pft. Suddenly, Wilbur felt a sharp pain in his body. His fanatical attention was quickly pulled back to reality, and the beautiful scene in his imagination shattered like a mirror. What? What's going on? Wilbur widened his eyes and stared blankly in front of him. His fist was only a few inches away from Colin's head, but this small distance was like a chasm at the end of the world that could never be crossed. At the same time, Wilbur's chest was in intense pain. He slowly lowered his head and saw Colin's right index finger gently tapping his chest. Bang! A huge explosive force instantly exploded from Wilbur's chest, sending him flying far away. Wilbur felt as if his body had been hit by a violent rhinoceros. His limbs were weak and his head was dizzy. He wanted to struggle to stand up, but he failed after trying a few times. Young Master Wilbur. A middle-aged knight immediately got off his horse and wanted to help Wilbur up. "Don't touch me!" Wilbur roared, his expression exceptionally ferocious. One move. He couldn't even take a single move from his opponent. Anger and shame surged into Wilbur's brain like a tidal wave, making him almost go crazy. "Norman! You go!" Wilbur ordered the middle-aged knight who was trying to help him up. The Norman knight hesitated for a moment and advised, "Young master, this isn't a suitable way to treat a guest. If I tell you to go, then go." Wilbur seemed to have fallen into madness. "Haven't you always admired Viscount Angeli? Now that there's such a good opportunity to fight, how can you not grasp it? Go." The Norman knight was helpless. He could only turn around and stand in front of Colin. He first gave a knight's salute and said, "Sorry, Viscount Angeli, please allow me to witness your martial arts." Colin smiled faintly and returned the salute. "Please." Just as the two's auras were rising and they were about to decide the victor, an old and deep voice suddenly sounded. "Stop." Chapter 295. Colin retracted his aura and turned around to see a tall and thin old man standing behind him. The old man was wearing a simple black casual outfit and had a head full of white hair. However, his spirit was hale and hearty, and his body was strong and straight. At first glance, He looked like a soldier who had been on the battlefield when he was young. Grandpa. Wilbur quickly struggled to get up and greeted him. Colin then realized that this old man was the target of their visit, Governor Seabass. Humph. Is this how you greet your distinguished guests? Seabass glared at Wilbur and reprimanded him. His imposing manner made the temperature of the room drop by several degrees. Grandpa, I was wrong. Wilbur, who was originally arrogant and domineering, was now completely like a quail in front of Seabass. When Vera saw this, she smiled and said, Grandpa, you don't have to blame my cousin too much. He was just playing around with Colin. Seabass looked at Vera and smiled. He nodded and said, Vera, I haven't seen you for many years. You have grown so much. I heard that you are already married. Yes, Grandpa. Vera came to Colin's side and held his arm. She smiled sweetly and said, Colin Viscount Angley is my husband. Greetings, Your Excellency Consul. Colin hurriedly bowed. I have heard a few things about you. You are very good. You are indeed a young hero. Seabass nodded at Colin and praised him. Colin said a few words of modesty. However, the other party's gentle and friendly attitude did not make Colin feel relieved. Every old fox in the political circle would not lack this kind of superficial skill. However, they would only show their true side when it came to the other party's interests and political position. After some small talk, the atmosphere suddenly eased a lot. Seabass also enthusiastically led Vera and Colin into the main castle's living room. The decoration style of this living room was a good example of what it meant to be extremely luxurious. The curved dome was made from 100-year-old Paulownia wood from the dark forest. It was covered with gold leaf and inlaid with gemstones of various colors. The crystal candlesticks hanging from the ceiling emitted soft light, reflecting on the exquisite murals and sculptures. It appeared magnificent and full of an elegant and noble artistic aura. Seabass sat down on the main seat. Soon after, several young and beautiful maids took small steps forward and presented various fruits, desserts, and purple gold wine jugs. They filled the wine cups of every guest with transparent wine, and a fresh, elegant, mellow, and sweet exotic wine fragrance spread throughout the hall. Even Colin, who did not know much about wine, could tell that this was definitely an expensive wine. It was even better than the one at the palace banquet last night. Seabass raised his glass and said with a hearty laugh, This is a gin that I've collected for 80 years. Come and have a taste. Colin and Vera quickly raised their glasses to return the gesture. While tasting the wine, Colin looked around. He had to admit that Senator Seabass' wealth was beyond his imagination. It must be known that although Seabass had a noble status, he didn't have a noble title or land, so he didn't have a fixed tax income. If he only relied on the salary of a senator, Colin couldn't imagine how he could build such a luxurious manor. In the past, he had always heard that the senators had a big appetite. However, now it seemed that Colin had underestimated the great income of these senators. He suddenly felt very fortunate that he had been dissuaded by Aemon when he wanted to change the family emblem. Otherwise, if the Senate was really alarmed, then the Angeli family would have to pay a lot of money. Seabass put down his glass and asked, Vera, I heard that your father left behind a will. Yes, granduncle. Vera immediately took out the will and handed it to Seabass. Seabass opened it and looked at it. There was no joy or anger on his face. He then returned the will to Vera and said, Since your father has appointed you as the Marquis of the Northern Frontier, then I have no objection to you inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North. However, at this time, if you want to smoothly accept the conferment from His Majesty, then there is one more thing that you need to do. What is it? Accept the baptism. Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly asked, Your Excellency, there is no rule in the Lord's law that states that one must be a knight to accept the title of a Duke of the Empire, right? Indeed, there is no such rule. Seabass nodded, but then he frowned and said, However, the situation in the imperial capital is quite special now. Vera's identity as a sorcerer will cause her to suffer a lot of criticism, and it might even cause her to be unable to smoothly inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Vera said in a dignified tone, "Is it because Prince Lexi is preparing to start a war against Yule?" Seabass nodded and said, "Yes." Colin considered his tone and said, "This matter is still at the proposal stage, and it may not be implemented yet." Seabass smiled and said confidently, "Believe me, the Empire will soon declare war against Yule." Colin's heart sank. Since a consul of the Council of Elders had said so, it meant that Prince Rich had successfully won the support of the majority of the elders. He was very confident that the proposal could be passed by the Council of Elders directly without Emperor Reinhardt's objection. The situation was not good. "Granduncle, do you also support the declaration of war against Yule?" Vera could not help but ask. Seabass looked into Vera's eyes and sighed before he said, "Vera, I know that you have feelings for Yule, but I still advise you to change your stance as soon as possible and convert to the God of Light. Do not let yourself go against the nobles of the Empire." Vera shook her head and said, "Granduncle, in fact, I have already converted to the God of Light a long time ago. However, I have always believed that mages and knights are not natural opposites. I can also feel the guidance of the God of Light when I am pursuing the truth of the arcane." Seabass had a serious expression on his face as he said, "Vera, if you are willing to serve the God of Light wholeheartedly, then you must give up the path of the arcane. Otherwise, it will be blasphemy against the God of Light." When he saw that Vera was about to argue again, Colin quickly held her hand and shook his head slightly. Vera understood and suppressed the dissatisfaction and grievance in her heart. She did not say anything else. Colin smiled as he eased the heavy atmosphere in the hall and said, "Let's not waste time. Your Excellency, Vera is still a little unfamiliar with how to serve the God of Light, but please believe that she is sincere in her desire to convert to the God of Light. We will also contact the church as soon as possible to arrange the baptism ceremony." "Well, that would be for the best." Seabass's expression softened a little. "After Vera is baptized, I can also put the matter of the succession of the Dukes of the North on the agenda of the Senate meeting. However, if you want this matter to be passed smoothly, you will have to prepare some lobbying funds." "Lobbying funds? Isn't this just bribery?" Colin was speechless when he saw that the other party was accepting bribes so openly. Moreover, the bribe was even from his own grandniece. At the same time, he also had a deeper understanding of the Senate. "Your Excellency, how much lobbying funds do you need?" Colin asked carefully. Seabass picked up his glass and took a sip of wine before he said lightly, 5 million gold coins. When he saw that Colin and Vera were staring at him, he immediately added, "Don't make a fuss. This is the cost that I have to personally help you with. If it is someone else, it will cost even more." Colin sighed and made a difficult expression. "Your Excellency, it is not that we do not believe in you, but the northern frontier has just experienced a great chaos. The House of St. Hilda is unable to raise such a huge sum of money in such a short time." Seabass glanced at Colin and said lightly, "Viscount Angley, didn't you defeat the giant demon empire and force them to sign a peace agreement? You also received a large sum of war reparations and slaves, right?" Colin's heart was filled with anger. This old man was actually scheming against him. That is indeed the case. However, I am afraid that you do not know that the giant demon empire's finances are also quite difficult. The war reparations are paid in installments. As for the slaves, I am afraid that they will not be able to gather them in such a short time. Seabass slammed his glass on the table and said coldly, "Viscount Angley, if you are not willing to show the sincerity that you deserve, I am afraid that you will not be able to move an inch in Imperial Dragon City." Colin pretended to be in fear and trepidation as he replied, "Your Excellency, you have misunderstood. I just want to confirm with Ice Stone City that the reparations from the giant demon empire have been received. I will give you a reply when I have the exact information." Seabass's smile returned to his face as he nodded and said, "That is right. The two of you are still too young and do not understand the political rules of the capital. It is inevitable that you will make some mistakes and offend people that you should not offend. Therefore, from now on, if you have any problems, you will first ask for my opinion. As an elder, I will naturally give you the help that you deserve." Colin and Vera quickly stood up and thanked him. After chatting for a while, the two of them said goodbye and left. After leaving the manor and boarding the carriage, Vera's face turned from bright to gloomy as she asked, "Colin, do we really trust Seabass?" When Colin heard the change in the way that Vera addressed Seabass, he laughed in his heart and said, "You should already know the answer, right?" Vera nodded and frowned as she said, "I do not like this person." "Then there is no need to care about him," Colin said lightly. Vera was still a little hesitant. "Then, will this anger the Senate?" "Seabass alone can't represent the Senate," Colin said coldly. Moreover, he might have forgotten that it was the House of St. Hilda that pushed him to the position of senator. It is he who needs the House of St. Hilda. It is not the House of St. Hilda who needs him. Chapter 296. What? Governor Leadham rejected our request to visit him. As soon as they returned to their residence in the Phoenix Palace, Scholar Dwayne brought another piece of bad news. "Yes, Lord Viscounts." They responded that Governor Leadham is not in good health recently and is unable to meet with guests. Vera sighed and said, "It seems that the governor of the San Lorenzo family is also biased towards Prince Leadham." Scholar Dwayne shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. Governor Leadham is already 108 years old and it is said that he often suffers from health problems. This time, he might not be looking for an excuse to avoid us." Colin was speechless when he heard this and asked, "He is already so old. Why is he still not retiring?" Scholar Dwayne explained helplessly, "The governor's position is for life. As long as Governor Leadham is still alive, he will not take the initiative to retire. After all, the members of the Senate are all collateral relatives of the various families. They do not have titles or territories. Once they are stripped of the glory of the Senate, they will immediately become insignificant characters that no one cares about. Is there no way to remove a governor?" Colin's eyes flashed as he asked thoughtfully. Scholar Dwayne seemed to have guessed the real purpose of Colin's question. He shook his head and said, "No. The purpose of the establishment of the Senate was to create a completely independent supervision and balance system outside of the current administrative system of the empire. Therefore, in order to ensure that the decisions of the members of the Senate are not influenced by external factors, once a senator is elected, they will serve for life. Unless the governor violates the laws of the empire, otherwise, even His Majesty the Emperor cannot remove him." Colin chuckled. He was a little disdainful of this so-called independent supervision system. Nowadays, it was a well-known fact that the Senate accepted bribes. Governor Seabass had just asked him for a sky-high lobbying fee. It could be seen that the system of the Senate was completely corrupted. Is there no way to restrict the senators? Scholar Dwayne thought for a moment and said, "There is no way to restrict them. However, there are two main ways to influence the senators. The first is bribery. This is also the most common way to persuade them. The senators do not have any territories. If they want to live a luxurious life, they will need the support of gray income. The other way is to inherit the seat of the patriarch." Succession. Colin was puzzled. Don't elders have lifelong tenure? How do I inherit it? The inheritance I'm talking about is different from the inheritance of ordinary titles. The foundation of the inheritance of titles is hereditary. As long as the feudal lord's laws don't change, then the first successor of the feudal lord can naturally inherit everything. But the elders are different. Because the elders are not hereditary, the descendants of the elders cannot, naturally, inherit their seat in the Council of Elders. Hearing this, Colin understood what Scholar Dwayne meant. Since it was impossible to inherit it naturally, it meant that the descendants of the elders could be, artificially, pushed into the Council of Elders. As for the current members of the Senate, all of them came from the 117 most prestigious families of the Radiance Empire. In order to become a Senate member, one had to first become a candidate recommended by each family. Then, this candidate had to obtain more than half of the votes in the Senate before they could officially enter the Senate. The second restriction mentioned by Scholar Duane was referring to the recommendation qualifications of the patriarch candidates. Each family also used this method to ensure that their elders would not betray the family's will. For example, Seabass. His position as a senator was lifelong. If he wanted his grandson, Wilbur, to enter the Council of Elders after his death to inherit his position, he had to first get the Duke of St. Hilda to recommend Wilbur as a candidate for the Patriarch. In this way, the Duke of St. Hilda would have the means to restrict Seabass. However, the problem now was that Vera had not yet inherited the position of the Duke. On the contrary, she still needed the approval of the Council of Elders. Generally, the inheritance of the nobles of the empire did not need to go through the Council of Elders. They only needed to be conferred the title by the Lord. Only the dukes of the 4 territories were different. They guarded the 4 territories of the empire and were the key forces to resist the foreign races. The selection of the duke was very important, so there was an additional procedure in the Council of Elders. However, Seabass' attitude just now had already made Colin realize that this senator from the House of St. Hilda did not really want to help Vera become the Dukes of the North. However, Colin discovered that he did not have any means to influence the other party, other than paying a huge amount of lobbying fees. Was he really going to be ruthlessly ripped off? No. If the other party took the money and did not do anything, Colin would not be able to do anything to him. Moreover, the northern frontier had just been pacified, and they urgently needed this sum of money to alleviate their predicament. He could not use it to benefit that old man. How about I kill him? Colin's heart was ruthless. However, he immediately hesitated. After all, the imperial capital was a place with hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Colin did not want to use such a method. If he was discovered, then he could only take Vera and go into exile. How about converting? However, Colin felt that converting into a blood descendant would be very risky. Because blood descendants had self-awareness, Colin had never tried to convert his enemies into blood descendants. Currently, the 3 blood descendants, Knight Charles, Queen Aisha, and Knight Vala, were all indebted to Colin. Charles was reborn from a broken limb, Aisha came back from the dead and took revenge, and as for Vala, she felt guilty towards Colin. After atoning for her sins with her death, she was given a second life by Colin. In short, even if the 3 of them were not blood descendants, they would not betray Colin. Converting them into blood descendants would only strengthen their attachment and make Colin trust them more. However, if it was Seabass, Colin did not dare to convert him into a blood descendant. Although he could indeed use bloodline suppression to make a blood descendant unable to resist him, this kind of control was limited to the physical body, and he could not control the mind. What if Seabass pretended to submit to Colin, but turned around and sold Colin out? Of course, if he converted into a blood slave without self-awareness, there would be no need to worry about betrayal. However, if he did that, it would be easy for him to be seen through. After all, blood slaves did not have self-awareness and only knew how to listen to orders, unless Colin split his consciousness to control them. However, this kind of control was very stiff, and it was possible to fool them in a hurry, but after a long time, they would definitely be exposed. Was there really no way to deal with Seabass? Colin thought for a long time, and suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration and said, "Actually, we don't have to fight for Senator Seabass." "What do you mean?" Vera had a puzzled expression on her face. "Senator Seabass only has 1 vote, and whether he agrees or not doesn't matter much. As long as we can get the other 20 or so elders of the northern frontier to vote for us, it will be fine." Scholar Duane's eyes lit up, you mean to say that we can make Senator Seabass a mere figurehead? Colin smiled and nodded, that's right. Although Vera is not the Dukes of the North yet, the northern frontier is now under our control. As long as we put pressure on the major families of the northern frontier, then we can influence the elders of these families through the patriarchs of these families. In this way, Seabass will be insignificant. Scholar Dwayne nodded repeatedly, this is indeed a good idea, but I am worried that there might not be enough time. Colin immediately ordered, forget it. We don't know when Prince Rhy and the others are going to send the proposal to the Senate, but we can't just sit here and wait for death. Vera, immediately write a letter to Winter City and ask Marquis Garcia to gather the lords of the northern frontier and put pressure on them. Okay. Vera immediately responded and turned around to look for a pen and paper. Colin said to Scholar Dwayne, well, let's just say that we have already gotten the 20 or so votes from the northern frontier. Next, we still need to persuade the elders of the northern frontier to ensure that Prince Lacey's proposal does not get an absolute majority of votes. Scholar Dwayne pondered for a moment and suggested, Lord Viscounts, I think that the San Lorenzo family is the best choice. Since Governor Leadham does not want to see us, then we can try someone else. Who? Her Royal Highness. Her Royal Highness? Colin hesitated. His vigilance towards the beautiful Royal Highness was no less than that of Seabass. If possible, he did not want to ask her for help. I am afraid that the Royal Highness will not be able to influence the elders of the San Lorenzo family. Scholar Dwayne shook his head and explained, Lord Viscounts, I hope that you can meet His Majesty through the Royal Highness. He is the key person who can really influence the elders of the San Lorenzo family. But, isn't the Emperor sick? Vera interrupted when she heard Scholar Dwayne's words. Scholar Dwayne curled his lips and said, I am 80% sure that he is pretending to be sick so that he can avoid Prince Lacey. At the same time, he does not want the proposal to go through the Imperial Council. Colin also nodded and said, that's right. Moreover, the Emperor is the one who is the most anxious about this matter. If the proposal to declare war is passed by a large number of votes in the Senate, then it will definitely be a fatal blow to his prestige. It can even be said that from then on, Prince Lacey in the Senate will be able to directly control him. Yes. Scholar Dwayne continued, moreover, Emperor Reinhardt has the right to recommend candidates for the elders of the San Lorenzo family. He can influence Governor Leadham's attitude more than we can. Just as Colin was determined to meet Empress Mistella again, a servant knocked on the door and entered. He then handed an invitation letter to Colin. Colin opened the letter with a slightly puzzled expression. Crete Sangarian. Scholar Dwayne's eyes lit up when he heard this name. He said, this is the governor of the Sangarian family in the Senate. Colin immediately revealed a smile and said, that's right. This governor has invited us to a banquet. Chapter 297. The afterglow of the setting sun shrouded Imperial Dragon City, covering the entire city with a layer of gorgeous gauze. On the streets of the northern district, a luxuriously decorated carriage was slowly moving forward. After seeing the emblem on the side of the carriage, the passers-by stopped and bowed. As a paladin family that had guarded the northern frontier for thousands of years, it was no surprise that St. Hilda had such prestige. Inside the carriage, Colin looked at Vera, who kept nodding to the passers-by, and smiled. Aren't you tired? Vera put down the curtain to block out the respectful and admiring gazes. She stuck out her tongue and said, yes, I am a little tired. As she spoke, she twisted her sore neck. Vera was dressed in a dignified and elegant palace dress for the banquet at Crete's consul's house. The exquisite tailoring of the dress accentuated her perfect curves. Her long blonde hair was tied up in a bun, revealing her elegant and slender neck. Colin stretched out his hand to massage his wife's neck. Vera turned her head sideways and smiled sweetly at her husband. There was also a third wheel in the carriage, Scholar Dwayne. He kept looking down at the patterns on the carpet, as if he was trying to figure out some secrets from them. Colin could also see the awkwardness in the other party's expression, so he broke the silence. "Dwayne, why do you think Crete's consul took the initiative to invite us this time?" "I think he wants to cooperate with us," Scholar Dwayne replied without raising his head. "The expedition to the western region that has gone deep into the Orcs' territory has not brought back any good news. The St. Gerian family definitely does not want to see the Empire declare war on the sorcerers at this time. After all, they are still counting on the Empire's military assistance to the western region." Colin nodded. He had come to the same conclusion. Therefore, he felt more relaxed and happy along the way. With the support of the elders of the western region, it was more likely that they would be able to reject Prince Lacey's proposal. As they spoke, the carriage came to a stop. Scholar Dwayne got out of the carriage first, followed by Colin and Vera. "Miss Vera, Viscount Angley. Welcome to the Nightingale Manor." The one who spoke was an old man with a handsome face. He was wearing a white aristocratic suit. It was of high quality and exquisite workmanship. The decorations were simple but tasteful. His face was covered with the traces of the passage of time. His hair was a little white, but the amount of black hair was far more than white hair. His eyes were full of spirit, his face was rosy, and his back was straight. Although he was old, he looked quite strong. The old man's voice was gentle, and his temperament was refined. His every movement showed the dignified bearing of a superior. This man was one of the 5 senators of the Senate, Crete Sangarian. Colin and Vera hurriedly stepped forward to greet him. One must know that when they went to meet Seabass this morning, the other party did not even come out to greet them. However, when they came to meet the Western Region's governor, they were greeted with such courtesy. In comparison, it was obvious that Seabass was not sincere in helping Vera at all. Under the guidance of Crete, everyone entered the manor. Of course, no one dared to provoke Colin along the way. Hundreds of candles illuminated the dining hall as if it was daytime, and the air was filled with the refreshing fragrance of plants. Crete warmly invited Vera and the others to take a seat. Then, the young and beautiful maids entered in a single file and served the exquisite food. The decorations of the Nightingale Manor were also very luxurious. It seemed that Crete was not the only person in the Senate. However, Colin did not care whether the other party was greedy or not. As long as he could help him, he did not mind paying a price. Of course, he could not ask for too much like Seabass. Colin did not want to be taken advantage of. Crete raised his glass and said in a hearty voice, "Distinguished guests from the northern frontier, although the current situation in the Empire is turbulent, I believe that the western region and the northern frontier have the same position on certain issues. As long as we work together and advance and retreat together, we will definitely be able to achieve the ideal result." Colin's eyes lit up. He was pleasantly surprised by the frankness and sincerity of the Western Region's governor. He downed the wine in his glass and smiled. "Your Excellency, you are right. The northern frontier also believes that this is not the best time to declare war on Yevil." "Very good." Crete nodded with satisfaction, but then he asked with some concern, "But Governor Seabass of your family supports declaring war on Yevil, and he is encouraging the elders of the northern frontier to vote in favor of Prince Lacey's proposal. Miss Vera, are you aware of this?" Vera's expression changed slightly, and she nodded. "Yes, Your Excellency, we are aware of this. However, please rest assured that Governor Seabass alone does not represent the northern frontier, and he may not be able to influence the attitude of all the elders of the northern frontier." Colin also smiled and added, "Although Vera has not officially inherited the position of the Dukes of the North, she has the will of the previous Duke, so she is the rightful heir. Moreover, the lords of the northern frontier also recognize Vera's right to inherit the position. They will put pressure on their elders to reject the proposal of declaring war." Crete's expression relaxed, and he smiled again. "Good. As long as the northern frontier and the western region remain the same, then the proposal of declaring war will not be able to get an absolute majority of votes. When Scholar Duane saw this, he cautioned, "Your Excellency, the only thing that we need to worry about now is the issue of time. Miss Vera has already written a letter back to the northern frontier, asking Marquis Garcia to put pressure on the lords of the northern frontier. However, I am afraid that it will take some time for this kind of pressure to be passed on to the elders of the northern frontier. I am not sure if we can make it in time for the vote on the proposal." When Crete heard this, he laughed and said, "Don't worry, we will definitely make it in time." When Colin saw that the other party was so confident, he quickly asked, "Oh, has the Senate arranged the voting agenda for this proposal?" Crete shook his head and said, "Not yet. However, you can rest assured that Prince Lacy's proposal will not be able to be submitted to the Senate for a vote until the end of this month." "Why? Do you know why this proposal has not been submitted to the Senate for so long?" "It is because the proposal needs the approval of the chairman on duty before it can be submitted to the Senate for a vote. This month's chairman is Governor Letham." Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately understood what the other party meant. When he thought about how Governor Letham had pretended to be sick and refused Vera's visit, he suddenly realized something. "You mean Governor Letham is deliberately pretending to be sick and delaying the proposal to prevent it from being submitted to the Senate?" Crete nodded with a smile, confirming Colin's guess. Vera's face lit up as she said, "Does that mean that the elders of the San Lorenzo family are also against this proposal?" However, Crete shook his head and said, "No, Prince Lacy's influence is too great. The elders of the San Lorenzo family are wavering, and I estimate that more than half of them will vote in favor of this proposal." "That's enough," Colin said excitedly. "After all, we only need 1/3 of the opposition votes to stop the proposal from being passed." At this time, the stone in his heart was finally lifted. However, through this storm, Colin also deeply understood the terrifying influence of Prince Lacy in the capital. Even though Emperor Reinhardt and the governors of the San Lorenzo family were unwilling to declare war on Yevil, they did not dare to oppose his proposal directly. They could only delay it by pretending to be sick and then use other means to prevent the proposal from being passed. No wonder Emperor Reinhardt was willing to take the risk to cooperate with Mr. Lacy in order to obtain the means to restrain the paladin. No matter who was sitting on the throne, they would not be able to eat or sleep well in the face of such a powerful paladin. Next, everyone put down their worries and began to enjoy the delicious food. As they chatted and laughed, the atmosphere of the banquet gradually warmed up. However, at this time, an old man who looked like a butler hurried to Governor Crete's side and reported a few words in a low voice. Then, everyone saw that Crete's face had turned pale. A bad premonition arose in Colin's heart. He asked carefully, "Sir Consul, what happened?" Crete was stunned for a moment, and he seemed to be a little slow to react. After a long while, he looked up at Colin and said in an extremely heavy tone, "Governor Letham has unfortunately passed away." Chapter 298. In the brightly lit dining hall, only the sound of breathing could be heard. This sudden bad news caught everyone off guard. Their original beautiful dream was destroyed like a bubble, and the cold and cruel reality made everyone's heart heavy. After a long while, Colin finally asked in a difficult tone, "How did Governor Leadham die?" "He died of old age." Governor Crete squeezed out these two words from between his teeth, and his face was full of horror and anger. Obviously, no one in the room believed this answer. How could Consul Leadham die at such a crucial moment? It seemed that Prince Leon had lost his patience and had taken the most extreme measures to get rid of the biggest obstacle in the way of the declaration of war. After Governor Leadham, who will be the next chairman? Scholar Duane asked in a deep voice. Imogen St. Prospero, Crete said with a dignified expression. Colin's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. His surname was St. Prospero, and this governor was obviously from the eastern region, and the eastern region was leaning towards. Colin had just met the second son of the Duke of the Eastern Region, the Earl of Avon, and his fiancée at the palace banquet yesterday, and this fiancée was Prince Leon's daughter. Therefore, it was obvious that the eastern region had completely fallen to Prince Leon's side. Moreover, in terms of their own interests, the eastern region was the most eager to see the empire declare war on Yevil. After all, Yevil itself was located at the border between the eastern region and the Radiant Moon Forest. Its existence had always been a thorn in the eastern region's heart. Now that the empire was willing to send troops to wipe out Yevil, the eastern region would definitely support it with both hands and feet. After Governor Leadham's death, Governor Amasan took over as the chairman of the Senate. Of course, he would not delay any longer and would definitely push for a vote on the proposal to declare war on Yevil as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, Vera had no time to pressure the senators of the northern frontier to disregard Governor Seabass's orders and vote against the proposal. Moreover, Governor Leadham's death would also shock the senators of the San Lorenzo family, and more people would probably lean towards Prince Leon. Therefore, if the proposal to declare war was put to a vote in the Council of Elders, it would definitely receive an absolute majority of votes. Thinking of this, Colin could not help but feel despair in his heart. Bang! Crete slapped the table heavily. Unable to suppress the fury and fear in his heart anymore, he bellowed, "He is breaking the rules of the game." Indeed. Killing an Archon of the Council of Elders brazenly was a bit too much. As a consul, Crete couldn't help but feel a little sad. He stood up with a swoosh and said angrily, "I will never condone such a desecration of the highest authority of the empire. No matter who did it, they must pay the price." Crete's face was gloomy, and he was shivering uncontrollably. There was no telling whether it was because of fury or fear. However, it was clear that he wasn't willing to give up just like that. Even if the murderer was Prince Lacy, the consul from the western region was unwilling to compromise. He looked at Vera and Colin with bright eyes and said, "I will immediately contact the senators I am familiar with and ask for a thorough investigation into the cause of Governor Leadham's death." After saying that, he strode out of the dining room without waiting for a response. Colin and Vera looked at each other for a while and could only sigh a few times. With heavy hearts, they bid farewell to the butler and left. After boarding the carriage, Colin and the other two fell silent. Obviously, they were all thinking about how to resolve the current situation. The situation was already in their favor, and they were about to stop Prince Leon's proposal from passing through the Council of Elders. However, no one had expected that the paladin of the San Lorenzo family would choose to flip the table. This was really too unruly. Colin secretly cursed in his heart. He had been restraining himself and working hard within the framework of this political game. However, since someone had taken the initiative to destroy the game, he couldn't be blamed for not following the rules. At this moment, Vera suddenly asked, "Colin, do you think Crete will be able to find the real murderer who killed Governor Leadham?" Colin sighed and said, "I don't think there is much hope. Since Prince Leon dared to kill, he certainly wouldn't leave any traces behind. Therefore, even if everyone knows that he killed Governor Leadham, no one can do anything to him if there is no evidence." "That's right. No one can do anything to Prince Leon." Scholar Dwayne also agreed, but then he added solemnly, "However, the changes in people's hearts do not require evidence. Prince Leon's move may seem to have succeeded in getting his proposal passed through the Council of Elders, but he will lose even more. Perhaps it won't show in a short time, but this wanton trampling on the rules will bring him a fatal backlash one day." Colin nodded in silence. Indeed, Prince Leon was now relying on his peerless strength to ignore the rules. However, the paladin was still a human, not a god. One day, he would grow old and his strength would decline. The more unscrupulous he was now, the more he would be punished when his strength was no longer enough to deter everyone. Of course, that day was still very far away, and Colin had to face the thorny problem at hand. Just as Colin was racking his brains to come up with a countermeasure, the carriage suddenly stopped. Scholar Dwayne lifted the curtain and was about to ask what had happened when he heard the accompanying guard report, "Miss Vera, there is a mage blocking our way in front. A mage? As soon as Vera heard the guard's report, she immediately got out of the carriage and saw an old man wearing a silver robe standing in the middle of the road, looking at her with a smile. Master Ernest! Vera exclaimed in surprise. She was about to walk over to greet the old man, but as soon as she took a few steps, she realized that her hand was being held back by Colin. That is the president of the Yule Mage Council, Vera turned around and explained. Don't worry, nothing will happen. Well, be careful then, Colin said as he let go of her hand. However, he still took a few steps forward and maintained a distance between them, giving the other party enough privacy. Ernest talked to Vera for about a quarter of an hour before he nodded at Colin and disappeared into the night. What did he say to you? Colin asked as soon as they got into the carriage. Master Ernest heard that Prince Leon wants to declare war on Yule, so he wants to meet Emperor Reinhardt to seek a peaceful solution. Then why didn't he go through the normal diplomatic channels? Why did he come to you instead? He said that he has already submitted a letter of credence, but he did not receive any response at all. That is why he came to me, hoping that I can pass on the message to His Majesty. What else did he say? He said that Yule does not want to be the enemy of the Empire, and that Mr. Ernest's actions in the northern frontier were all his own actions. He did not receive the consent of the Mage Council, and the Mage Council will not tolerate the use of a forbidden spell to sacrifice civilians. That's all. That's all. Colin shook his head slightly. He was a little disappointed with the president of the Mage Council. Even though he had submitted a letter of credence, Emperor Reinhardt was not willing to meet him. Did he really think that His Majesty would agree to meet him through Vera? Moreover, what he said was not important at all. If Colin was in Emperor Reinhardt's shoes, he would not have been moved by these words. What's more, the key person in the political situation in the imperial capital was not Emperor Reinhardt at all. Even the emperor was forced to pretend to be sick. Instead of looking for Emperor Reinhardt, it would be better for Soren to meet Prince Leon directly. Colin sighed secretly. It seemed that he could not rely on Yule anymore. Not long after, the carriage arrived at the Phoenix Palace. When they arrived at the side hall, Colin helped Vera out of the carriage before saying goodbye to Scholar Dwayne. As soon as Colin entered the room, he smelled a familiar fragrance. When he looked up, he saw Empress Medela leaning against the sofa and looking at them with a smile on her face. Vera, Colin, I have been waiting for you for a long time. Chapter 299. Empress Medela sank into the soft sofa with a smile on her delicate red lips. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and rested her chin on the other hand. Her golden hair casually draped over her shoulders like the noon sun, and her slender snow-white calves swayed gently under her red dress. Her posture was languid, and her expression was charming. Unfortunately, Colin was not in the mood to appreciate the beauty in front of him. In fact, there was a strong sense of dissatisfaction rising in his heart. It was obvious that Emperor Reinhardt was the one who caused this trouble, but he was constantly running around trying to win the support of all the big shots. On the other hand, the couple was pretending to be sick, and the other was showing off her beauty. Auntie, were you waiting for us? Yes. Empress Medela sat up straight and smiled. Judging from your expressions, you must have heard about Consul Leadham's death, right? Vera glanced at Colin and saw his gloomy face. She nodded and said, yes, we were just having dinner at Crete's house when we heard the news. Auntie, why don't you look worried at all? What is there to be worried about? Empress Medela laughed. You are the one who is wasting your time on this matter. Hey, didn't I tell you from the beginning? Just wait in Phoenix Palace. When the time is right, Vera will naturally inherit the position of the Dukes of the North. Auntie, Prince Lacy is going to start a war against Yevil. How can I just wait here like an idiot? Then, you have been working hard for the past few days. Have you come up with any good results? Faced with Empress Medela's rhetorical question, Vera was a little depressed. She lowered her head and did not speak. At this time, Colin took over the conversation and asked in a deep voice, "Your Highness, did you already have a solution?" Empress Medela smiled charmingly but did not answer Colin's question. Instead, she said, "Consul Leadham's death is unclear, and at such a critical and sensitive time, the Senate will not let this matter rest. Some people will definitely pay the price for this." Colin looked at Empress Medela's confident face and could not help but blurt out, "Are you so sure that the Senate will be able to catch the real murderer?" "Of course." Empress Medela replied without hesitation. Colin frowned. He was just about to say that with Prince Lacy's strength, how could there be any evidence of him killing an old consul? But then he realized that this was all a trap. For Empress Medela to be so confident, there was only one possibility: she was framing him. Colin realized that he had been misled all this time. Indeed, Prince Letham's death benefited Prince Letham the most, so he naturally thought that it was Prince Letham who killed him. Moreover, Prince Lacy did have the ability to kill a consul without anyone noticing. Empress Medela's, Consul Leadham's death, Prince Lacy's of Consul Leadham. It could also be a trap set up by the Empress, no, by Emperor Reinhardt's faction. Colin Medela did not know what they did to Consul Leadham's body to make Prince Lacy unable to clear his name. But looking at Empress Medela's expression, they must have enough confidence to make Prince Lacy unable to defend himself. As long as Prince Lacy carried the crime of killing a consul, he would become the public enemy of the nobles. Even if no one dared to use such a crime to execute a paladin, Prince Lacy would be completely isolated and would lose his appeal. He would probably become a wandering knight from then on. This way, the proposal to declare war on the mages would naturally die prematurely. Moreover, the emperor had used this incident to remove the biggest obstacle to his control of the empire. From now on, Imperial Dragon City would truly be under Emperor Reinhardt's absolute control. Looking at Colin's constantly changing expression, Empress Medela seemed to have seen through his thoughts. She quietly got up and walked in front of Colin and said lightly, "Now you should understand why I reminded you not to mess around at the welcome banquet, right?" At this time, the charming smile on Empress Medela's face had disappeared and was replaced by an inviolable dignity, showing the authority that an empress of the empire should have. Of course, Colin Medela understood. It turned out that this proposal to declare war was a trap from the beginning to the end. It was just to fabricate a motive for Prince Lacy to kill. As for whether the proposal would be passed or not, Empress Medela did not care from the beginning. It was ridiculous that Colin and Vera had been kept in the dark and thought that they were smart enough to run around. What was even more ridiculous was that Colin Medela had almost succeeded. With the support of the elders of the western region and Leadham's delay, Vera could have remotely pressured the elders of the northern frontier through Marquis Garcia Medela to disregard the request of Governor Sebas and vote against the proposal. Who would have thought that at the last moment, it would be his ally who would have completely strangled Colin Medela's plan in the bud? No, it was not an ally. Colin Medela had thought that he was an ally of the Emperor and Empress, but he did not expect that they would not even take him seriously. Just wait patiently. Don't mess around. Colin Medela and Vera Medela's efforts over the past few days were just a joke in the eyes of the Emperor and Empress. Even if they were about to achieve their goal was not the Emperor and Empress' goal. Their efforts could also be erased by the Emperor and Empress at will. Empress Medela looked at Colin expressionlessly and said coldly, "Perhaps we had some misunderstandings in Silvery Moon City before, and because of that, you lack the necessary trust in me. But I don't want this to happen again, otherwise." Empress Medela did not continue, but her cold eyes had already expressed her meaning very clearly. When Vera Medela saw this, she quickly stepped forward and persuaded, "Auntie, this time we also want to help. It's not that we don't trust you." Colin Medela suppressed the anger in his heart and bowed his head respectfully, "Your Highness, I know that I was reckless this time and I almost ruined your plan. I sincerely apologize to you. As for the misunderstanding in Silvery Moon City that you mentioned, I assure you that there is no such thing at all. I only have infinite respect and trust for you. That's the best. Empress Medella's charming smile finally appeared on her face again. Colin, you are a smart and capable person. With you assisting Vera in guarding the northern frontier, His Majesty and I can rest assured. So, don't do anything stupid again. Otherwise, Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier. This sentence was very serious. Colin Medela and Vera Medela could only bow their heads obediently and endure. At this moment, the authority of the Empress of the Empire was fully displayed. All right, you two should rest early. There is still a good show to watch tomorrow. After Empress Medela finished speaking, she lightly swayed her willowy waist and gracefully walked out. Vera Medela suddenly thought of something and suddenly called out from behind, "Auntie, on the way back, we met the President of the Mage Council, Ernest. He said that he wants to meet His Majesty." However, Empress Medela did not even turn her head and coldly said, he is just an idiot who is immersed in arcane research and has become stupid. How dare he want to meet His Majesty?" Before she finished speaking, her beautiful figure had already disappeared into the night. "Colin, it seems that Auntie is really angry," Vera Medela whispered as she held Colin's hand a little nervously. "Don't worry, we did not cause any trouble. Your auntie was just scolding us verbally." Colin Medela smiled and comforted her. Vera Medela nodded and said, "Then we should ask for Auntie's opinion first before we do anything in the future. Don't question her decisions anymore." "Okay." Colin Medela smiled and agreed, quietly hiding the dangerous light in his eyes. How could he tolerate Empress Medela's contempt? In particular, when Medela said that Vera is not the only one who can become the ruler of the northern frontier, Colin Medela realized that all Empress Medela wanted was an obedient northern frontier. As for who the ruler of the northern frontier was, she probably did not care. If Vera could do it, then so could Joyce. This made Colin Medela feel a deep sense of crisis. Chapter 300. Passing through the long corridor, Empress Medela returned to her chambers. Faint sounds of prayer came from the palace, rippling with soothing power. "Your Highness." The maids in front of the palace bowed in greeting. "Is His Holiness Gregory performing a healing spell on His Majesty?" "Yes." Empress Medela nodded and stood quietly outside the palace, waiting for the prayers to stop. Only then did she walk back in. The white gold holy light had not completely dissipated, covering the palace with a layer of holy light. "Your Majesty, are you feeling better?" Empress Medela walked quickly to the bed. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt was leaning against the bed, his face pale and his expression dispirited. This was not the state a powerful 6th grade knight should be in. "Thanks to His Holiness Gregory, I can feel my body slowly recovering." His voice was weak, as if a gust of wind could blow him away. "Your Majesty, you are too polite. This is mainly because of the Lord's radiance," Pope Gregory said with a smile. The Pope of the Church of Glory was standing in front of the Emperor's bed, holding a white scepter in his hand and wearing a crown of thorns on his head. His eyes were small, and because of his always smiling expression, no one could see the changes in his eyes. "Praise the Lord. May His radiance last forever," Empress Medela praised. Then she asked, "His Holiness Gregory, have you found the cause of His Majesty's illness?" The Pope frowned and sighed. His Majesty should have been poisoned, but I have never seen this kind of poison before. That's why the treatment process is so slow. A trace of disappointment flashed across Empress Medela's face, but then she thanked the Pope repeatedly and sent him out of the palace. When only the husband and wife were left in the palace, Emperor Reinhardt suddenly laughed. "Do you think this old man will deliberately slip up and let me die when he's treating me?" Empress Medela pursed her lips. "Gregory won't let you die in his hands. Besides, he's more concerned about whether or not you're really poisoned." "Of course I'm really poisoned. Cough, cough." Emperor Reinhardt coughed a few times and looked at the queen with a scrutinizing look, asking, "I'm really curious, where did you find this poison that even Gregory couldn't recognize? Will you attend tomorrow's funeral?" Empress Medela asked. "Will you attend tomorrow's funeral?" "Of course." Emperor Reinhardt declared without any hesitation, with ruthlessness beaming out of his eyes. "I'm going to watch my good uncle's reputation be ruined and his friends betray him." "Then you should rest early and recover your energy," Empress Medela said casually before getting up to leave. "Wait." Emperor Reinhardt called out to her. Queen Medela turned around and looked at her husband impatiently. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was clear. "What else do you want?" In the face of his wife's somewhat rude gaze, Emperor Reinhardt didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, "I heard that the two brats from the northern frontier have really done something. If it weren't for us, they might have been able to stop the proposal from going through the Senate." Empress Medela smiled disdainfully and said, "They're just two whimsical brats who think they're smart. They don't know how deep the waters of the Senate are, so they have such childish ideas. Don't worry, I've already taught them a lesson. Nothing like this will happen again in the future." Emperor Reinhardt nodded and then asked, "So you still insist on Vera inheriting the position of the Dukes of the North?" "Yes. But as you can see, Vera is not an easy character to control. Why not choose Joyce?" Empress Medela snorted and said, "Joyce is indeed easy to control, but when the time comes, we might not be the ones controlling him. Don't forget the lesson of the eastern frontier. Do you want the northern frontier to fall into the hands of the church? Joyce is only 10 years old. He still has 8 years to go before he reaches adulthood. Let's not talk about whether he will continue to have feelings for Archbishop Ajani after such a long time. Even if he really marries her, I am confident that I can deal with this woman. But Vera. Your brother has chosen a good husband for her. Are you worried about Colin Angeli?" Empress Medela narrowed her eyes thoughtfully. "Yes." Emperor Reinhardt nodded and said solemnly, "This knight of the northern frontier. I can't see through him. Many times, he has faced extremely bad situations, but he has been able to resolve them without any real danger. And some of the methods that he uses, even I don't understand." Empress Medela was silent for a moment and then said, "I understand your concerns, but Colin can be won over." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Based on the story that he told our son in Silvermoon City." Empress Medela nodded confidently. However, Emperor Reinhardt was not affected by his wife's confidence. The corner of his mouth twitched and he shook his head. "Do you want to hear my opinion?" Empress Medela did not say anything. It seemed like she did not want to listen, but she did not move either. Emperor Reinhardt smiled and continued, "I think that we can push Joyce to the position of the Dukes of the North, and then let him be engaged to Judy." "No." Empress Medela immediately interrupted when she heard her daughter's name. "Why not?" Emperor Reinhardt's face instantly turned gloomy. Empress Medela said word by word, "I will not let my daughter become a sacrifice for politics." "Marrying Joyce is a sacrifice?" "No, it has nothing to do with Joyce." Empress Medela's eyes flashed. "All marriages that cannot be decided by oneself are tragedies. Of course, it is also a sacrifice." Emperor Reinhardt was so angry that he laughed and asked, "So, our marriage is also a tragedy?" Empress Medela stared coldly into her husband's eyes. After a long while, she spoke softly. "Isn't it?" Emperor Reinhardt's breathing suddenly became rapid. An unnatural dark red appeared on his face. He stared at his wife with eyes full of anger, unwillingness, and naked possessiveness. Empress Medela stood there expressionlessly, as if ignoring her husband's gaffe. She waited until her husband calmed down a little before she spoke again. "Your Majesty, don't forget our common goal. That is what is truly precious. It is a goal that is worth our lives to pursue and achieve." Don't be immersed in the boring love between a man and a woman. Don't be entangled in whether I love you or not. You are right, my Empress. Emperor Reinhardt seemed to have finally calmed down, and he said in a calm tone, since you think you can control Colin, you'd better prove it to me. I don't want to hear just a few words. Okay. Empress Medela nodded slightly and turned to leave. Emperor Reinhardt stared at the departing figure with a complicated expression. Chapter 301. The Cathedral of Holy Light located on the Holy Mountain was magnificent and sacred, but it was unusually deserted. This was the closest place to the God of Light in the secular world, but at the same time, it was also the farthest place from the mortals. Only the real high-level members of the Empire of Light were qualified to come here and pray to the God of Light. In front of the God of Light, all beings are equal. This sentence seemed to be just an empty propaganda slogan. Of course, some people might be more equal than others. Today, the Cathedral of Holy Light was more lively than usual. Many nobles came to mourn for Governor Letham, and the attendants in front of the church were overwhelmed. Even the 3 cardinals stood in front of the steps to welcome the distinguished guests. Cardinal Tournan looked at the nobles who were walking up the steps one after another. Suddenly, he stepped forward and greeted, Miss Vera, Viscount Angley, welcome to the Cathedral of Holy Light. May the glory of the God of Light shine on you forever. Vera and Colin quickly returned the greeting, but they felt a little strange. Why was the cardinal so enthusiastic? With their current status, it was not necessary for the cardinal to welcome them personally. After all, Vera had not officially inherited the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin and Vera had never dealt with this person before. While they were puzzled, they heard Tournan say, Miss Vera, I heard that you are going to be baptized. Yes, Cardinal. Vera nodded, and she seemed to understand the Cardinal's plan. Sure enough, Tournan took the initiative to recommend himself. I wonder if I can have the honor to baptize you. Vera looked at Colin and saw him nodding gently. She smiled and said, Of course. It is my honor to have you preside over the baptism ceremony. The Cardinal's position in the Church of Light was second only to the Pope. Of course, it would be appropriate for Tournan to baptize Vera. However, at this moment, a grand voice suddenly sounded behind the 3 of them. Tournan, I will personally preside over Miss Vera's baptism ceremony. The 3 of them turned around and saw that Pope Gregory had appeared there at some point. Tournan's expression changed, and he hurriedly said, Of course, it's definitely more suitable for you to perform the baptism. Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. All sorts of doubts arose in his heart. He did not understand what was so special about Vera's baptism. Or was it that the conversion of a former mage to the church really had such great publicity value that even the Pope could not help but fight for this credit? Of course, Vera would not refuse the Pope's kindness, and she immediately agreed to his request. After the few of them discussed the time of the baptism ceremony, Colin led Vera into the church. After entering the prayer hall, Colin felt that his eyes and ears were suddenly quiet, as if the noisy world had been completely isolated. This was another kingdom that belonged to the gods. There were no candles or magic lamps in the hall. The holy light that fell from the sky dispelled all the darkness, and the people who were bathed in it could feel a vast and sacred aura. They could not help but quietly hide all the dirty and dark thoughts in their hearts, for fear that they would blaspheme the gods. At this time, many nobles had gathered in the hall to pay their condolences. Colin glanced around, but found that he did not know many of them at all. It would be great if Scholar Dwayne was also here. Colin could not help but think. Unfortunately, Scholar Dwayne was neither a noble nor a court minister, so he was not qualified to enter the Church of Holy Light. Fortunately, Vera still knew many people, and she was introducing Colin to the big shots in the capital in a low voice. The warm and fragrant breath hit Colin's ear, and it was a little itchy but also a little warm. The old man standing in the coffin is Pope Gregory, and behind him on the right are the 4 senators. We have already met 2 of them. The one with a long beard is the senator from the south, Dulles St. Landis. The last one is thin and tall, and he is the senator from the east, St. Prospero. Colin smiled as he looked at the 4 senators, and he found that their faces were very gloomy. Perhaps the death of Senator Letham made them feel sad. For a long time, the Senate had occupied the top of the Radiance Empire's political landscape with an aloof attitude. Even if the senators were corrupt by nature, no one could control them. But now, it seemed that someone had reached out to the Senate, and the first thing they did was to use the most cruel and bloody means. The senators, who used to be pampered in the past, were frightened overnight, and they inevitably began to feel insecure. The one who is dozing off is the Prime Minister of the Empire, Baron Heidegger. The one on his left is the Finance Minister of the Empire, Marquis Grandy, and to the left is, seeing that Vera suddenly stopped, Colin curiously turned his head and was about to ask what had happened, but he saw that she was looking at the door of the prayer hall. Colin also looked back and saw a handsome and elegant middle-aged knight at the door. He was wearing a gorgeous prince's suit, and there was a simple and dark knight's sword at his waist. He was walking in with his head held high, and his eyes were looking straight ahead. Wherever he went, it was as if he was the center of the world. Obviously, he was walking into the hall, but it was more like the entire towering Holy Light Cathedral was taking the initiative to approach him, and welcoming him to the center of the prayer hall. It was not until he stood in front of the coffin that everyone broke free from this strange phenomenon and breathed a sigh of relief. He is Prince Lacy. Vera's voice sounded again. In fact, Colin also knew that such a person could only be the Holy Knight who stood at the peak of the Empire's military strength. Although this was not the first time that Colin had faced a Holy Knight, the last time he met the Duke of St. Hilda in Icestone City, the other party was already seriously injured, and he did not give off such a strong sense of oppression. But now, facing a Holy Knight in his prime, Colin realized how small he was. Even if he was now a 5th-grade knight, after transforming, he would still dare to challenge a 6th-grade knight. But in front of Prince Lacy, Colin felt that if the other party wanted to kill him, he would not be able to withstand a single blow. This was the difference in the nature of life, just like the difference between a god and a mortal. His Majesty is here. Vera's voice sounded again. Colin turned around and saw a middle-aged man being pushed in a wheelchair. He was wearing a gorgeous robe, but his face was very pale, and his lips were completely pale. He did look like he had just recovered from a serious illness. Colin was a little confused. Could it be that Emperor Reinhardt was not pretending to be sick, but was really sick? Or was he really so dedicated that even if he was pretending to be sick, he would pretend to be sick? The one pushing Emperor Reinhardt was none other than Empress Medela. Behind her were 2 little fellows, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. At this point, the truly important people of the Empire of Light were all present. Colin could not help but let his imagination run wild. If the Congress of Mages were to be ruthless and cast a super forbidden spell on the Cathedral of Holy Light, and if they could wipe out everyone present, the Empire of Light might fall apart because of this. Dong dong dong. The melodious bell sounded, and everyone in the prayer hall put on their most solemn and sorrowful expressions. Pope Gregory's old but loud voice began to echo in the hall. Merciful God of Light, today we are gathered here to offer prayers for Consul Leadum San Lorenzo. He has finished his journey in the world and has finally returned to the embrace of the Lord. He came from the dust, and he will return to the dust. May you, with your supreme power, grant him peace. Wait. Beyond reason, but within expectations, the Pope's prayer was rudely interrupted by a rude voice. Colin looked in the direction of the voice, and saw a middle-aged man with a solemn face slowly walking out of the crowd to the center of the prayer hall, facing Pope Gregory. He is Consul Leadum's son, Fred San Lorenzo. Vera's voice sounded again in Colin's ears. Colin looked at the scene in front of him with great interest, looking forward to the next performance. He knew that the show was about to begin. Chapter 302. In the quiet and solemn prayer hall, only the suppressed breathing of the crowd could be heard. His Highness Gregory looked at Fred with an expressionless face. After a while, he asked, "Mr. Fred, do you have any requests?" Facing the Pope's condescending gaze, Fred's Adam's apple moved quickly. He seemed to be a little nervous, but soon, he adjusted his state of mind and said loudly, "Your Holiness Gregory, I don't mean to offend your authority, but my father's death is not clear. I can't accept that he was buried so carelessly. Mr. Fred, I can understand your pain and concerns, but I've personally examined Consul Leadham's body before. I didn't find any injuries, nor did I find any signs of poisoning. So, your father died of old age. Your Holiness, my father's body has always been healthy. He was talking and laughing with us during dinner last night. How could he suddenly die for no reason? There must be something wrong." Gregory's face darkened. He asked sternly, "Are you questioning my judgment?" Fred's heart skipped a beat under the Pope's fierce gaze. He quickly stuttered and explained, I didn't mean that. I just want to examine my father's body again to confirm the cause of his death, so, you still think there's something wrong with my examination result?" Gregory's tone became colder. Sweat broke out on Philide's forehead. He could barely withstand the Pope's almost tangible pressure. He opened his mouth, but was unable to utter a complete sentence. "Your Holiness." At this time, someone suddenly spoke up to help Fred. "I think Mr. Fred's request is reasonable. We should examine Consul Leadham's body carefully again." Pope Gregory looked at Emperor Reinhardt and said calmly, "Your Holiness, I don't think it's necessary. If there's something wrong with Leadham's death, why can't I find it out?" "That's not necessarily true." Emperor Reinhardt smiled and said, "You haven't figured out what the poison in my body is, have you?" Gregory narrowed his eyes and stared at Emperor Reinhardt. Emperor Reinhardt also stared back without flinching. The atmosphere in the prayer hall became tense again. Colin coldly looked at the two people confronting each other in the hall, understanding that this was a direct confrontation between the imperial power and the divine power. But the question was, why was Pope Gregory so insistent on a new autopsy? Was it because he felt that his prestige had been damaged? Or was he worried that something would really go wrong? At the same time, Colin glanced in the direction of Prince Lacy from time to time, only to find that the Holy Knight had remained silent from the beginning to the end, as if everything that had happened had nothing to do with him. He didn't seem to be worried that this was a conspiracy against him. Just as the Pope and the Emperor were in a deadlock, Queen Medela smiled and said, "Your Holiness, I believe everyone here is very concerned about the cause of Consul Leadham's death. It's not that we don't trust you, but some things need to be investigated deeply to get the right result. After all, you haven't dissected the body, so I'm afraid you'll miss some key things." Pope Gregory defended himself coldly, "I just don't want to desecrate Consul Leadham's body for no reason." Queen Medela refuted, "But we're more concerned about the cause of Consul Leadham's death and the dignity and authority of the Senate. If someone dares to kill a consul, we won't let them get away with it." Fred had recovered by now and hurriedly said, "Yes, Your Holiness. I also agree to dissect my father's body, and I believe that if my father's spirit is in heaven, he will definitely agree to this. When he was alive, he valued the responsibility and authority of the Council of Elders more than his own life." At this point, Pope Gregory could no longer forcefully deny it. Moreover, he also noticed that all the nobles present, especially the members of the Senate, nodded in agreement when Fred spoke. Obviously, the nobles present couldn't tolerate the empire's political order being destroyed so crudely. Pope Gregory had no choice but to nod and agree to dissect Consul Leadham's body. Soon, a coroner was summoned into the prayer hall. Faced with the scorching gazes of so many important people of the empire, he was a little nervous. But soon, he calmed down and took out his tools. Under everyone's watchful eyes, he cut open Consul Leadham's chest. Asterisk whoosh. Dark red congested blood gushed out, giving the coroner a fright. This also caused everyone present to reveal shocked expressions one after another. The deceased's chest cavity is bleeding, 'cause of death. Ruptured heart. The coroner said carefully. Wait. Why did my father's heart rupture? Fred asked hurriedly. Cold sweat broke out on the coroner's forehead, as if he didn't dare to answer this question. Pope Gregory suppressed the shock in his heart and took a few steps forward. But when he saw the exposed ruptured heart, he couldn't hide the look of disbelief on his face. Colin stretched his neck but couldn't see the situation in the coffin. But he knew that the real show was about to begin. Just as everyone was wondering what the coroner had found, Queen Medela also took a few steps forward and looked at the body in the coffin. Then, she revealed a look of shock. But it was hard to tell how much of this shock was real and how much of it was fake. Your Highness Prince Rhy, it's best if you come and see for yourself, Queen Medela suddenly said to Prince Rhy with a serious expression. Prince Rhy, who had been silent all this time, seemed to realize that this matter had something to do with him. Confusion appeared on his face, but he still came to the coffin. Then, his expression changed as well. After a moment of silence, Prince Rhy frowned and said bitterly, "That's right. That's right, this is my sword scar." Wow! Everyone's jaws dropped as they stared blankly at Prince Lacy. Colin was also stunned. Why was this paladin so honest? Was he fearless? Or did he find it beneath him to lie? But at the same time, he also had some doubts. Wasn't there no wound on Consul Letham's body? Pope Gregory couldn't have made a mistake about that. So why was there a sword wound on his heart? What kind of sword technique could pierce through the heart without hurting the skin? Perhaps she knew that many of the people present had the same doubts, so Empress Medela half explained and half questioned. Prince Rhy, I heard that you have a sword technique called verdict that can bypass the limitations of space and pierce the enemy's vitals. Is that true? Yes. Prince Rhy's expression was still indifferent. Then, do you think there's another way to pierce through the heart without hurting the skin? As far as I know, no. Prince Rhy said calmly, you don't have to beat around the bush. I can tell you directly that Consul Leadham's injury was caused by my verdict. The prayer hall was immediately filled with all sorts of whispers and discussions. Obviously, no one expected Prince Rhy to admit it so easily. But what surprised them even more was that Prince Rhy actually opened his mouth to deny it again, but I didn't kill Leadham. This time, the discussion grew louder. Queen Medela smiled brightly and continued to ask, Your Highness, since you deny killing Consul Leadham, how do you explain this sword scar? I can't explain it. Prince Rhy's answer was still as straightforward as ever. Colin was a little speechless at this moment. Did this prince think that he could do whatever he wanted just because he was the best in the world? Now, he didn't even care about framing him. But he was an Archon of the Council of Elders. He was one of the most important figures in the political circle of the Empire. Especially since Leadham was an elder of the San Lorenzo family and Prince Rhy's uncle. Once this accusation was confirmed, no matter how powerful Prince Rhy was, he would not be able to avoid being betrayed by his family. At this time, the nobles in the prayer hall gradually changed their expressions, especially the members of the Senate. They could not tolerate such a rule-breaker, even if he was a paladin. Prince Rhy seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter and said belatedly, I didn't kill him. He was still as domineering and direct as ever. But this sentence alone was not enough to convince the crowd. Queen Medela seemed to want to exonerate Prince Rhy. She asked, Your Highness, who else do you think could imitate this sword style and leave such a sword scar? No one. Prince Rhy said firmly, his face full of pride. Colin's mouth twitched. He was speechless. Should you be proud at this time? Perhaps it was because he had always been used to solving everything with force. He was used to everyone worshipping him as the incarnation of God when the name of the Holy Knight was revealed. Prince Rhy had probably forgotten how to deal with treacherous schemes and traps. Perhaps he really thought that as a paladin, everything he said should be taken for granted. But with such irrefutable evidence, even if Prince Rhy said that he did not kill anyone, would he be able to convince the crowd? Colin looked around and came up with a negative answer. Prince Rhy had a motive to kill. Now that there was irrefutable evidence, it was basically enough to convict him. Queen Medela said with a smile, "Your Highness, you're making things difficult for us. You say that you didn't kill anyone, but you also say that no one other than you can cause such a scar." This. Pope Gregory said, "Your Highness, the world is big and full of strange things. How can you be sure that no one can imitate this sword style?" Prince Rhy looked at the Pope indifferently but did not say anything. However, his eyes did not reveal gratitude. Instead, he felt that the Pope's words had tarnished his swordsmanship. Emperor Reinhardt, who was sitting in a wheelchair, finally spoke. He said coldly to Prince Rhy, "Uncle, if you can't prove your innocence, then I can only convict you." Prince Rhy stared into Emperor Reinhardt's eyes but did not say anything. Emperor Reinhardt's eyes were deep. He looked at his uncle without fear and at the same time, he declared, "Rhy San Lorenzo, in the name of the Emperor of the Empire of Light, I hereby strip you of your title of prince and banish you from the country. Unless you can find the real culprit, please don't step into the Imperial Dragon City again." Prince Rhy was still expressionless in the face of the Emperor's judgment. He stared at Emperor Reinhardt for a long time and did not say anything. The atmosphere in the prayer hall gradually became stagnant. Everyone felt an extremely terrifying pressure shrouding them, making them unable to breathe. Colin's heart was in his throat. He was afraid that the paladin would be impulsive and start a massacre. Time seemed to have stopped. It seemed like a moment, but it also seemed like a long time had passed. When everyone regained their senses, they realized that the prideful paladin had disappeared from the prayer hall without them noticing. Colin frowned. Obviously, he did not expect Prince Rhy to leave without saying anything. By leaving, he had almost confirmed the accusation of Leadham's murder. Unless he could find the real culprit. However, Colin did not have much hope. Moreover, he could not figure out what method the Emperor and the Empress used to kill Leadham. How could they kill him with Prince Rhy's famous move? Even Prince Rhy himself admitted that he was the only one who could use this move. How else could he explain himself? The proud paladin probably chose to leave because he was speechless. As a result, Prince Rhy was finally forced out of the political arena of the Empire by Emperor Reinhardt. From now on, the Empire of Light was really back under the control of the Emperor. At this time, Emperor Reinhardt's voice sounded again. "Alright, everyone, let us continue to mourn for Governor Leadham. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.